going to hold a hearing first on whether the Boston Public Schools will admit non-residents under the Massachusetts School Choice Plan unless there is a vote to the contrary by June 1st. Is there anyone here to testify on the school choice issue, Ms. Sullivan?
No, Mr. O'Connor.
Well, unless anyone has questions on the committee, we can adjourn the hearing on the Massachusetts School Choice Plan. Are there any questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair, may I just simply say, I assume it is the superintendent's recommendation, again this year, that we do not participate?
Yes, we don't.
Thank you.
It's my recommendation.
And I believe you've, Superintendent, you've shared your recommendation along with a few other supporting materials in our materials this evening,
Yes,
correct?
you have the materials in your packet.
Very good. Well, if there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this hearing on the Massachusetts School Choice Plan. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Would you please call the roll, Ms. Sullivan?
Ms. Oliver Davila? Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Jerry Robinson?
Yes.
Dr. Uriarte?
Yes.
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. LeConte?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Now we'll move into our regular school committee meeting, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight's meeting is being broadcast live by Boston City TV on YouTube, as well as Comcast Channel 24, RCN Channel 13, and FiOS Channel 1962. It will be rebroadcast at a later date. If you would also like to speak this evening but have not yet signed up, please see our staff person, Ms. Lena Parvex, out in the hallway. Sign up for public comment will end promptly at 6:30 p.m. this evening. We'll begin first with the approval of minutes from the April 25th school committee meeting. If the minutes are approved as presented, hard copies will be made available immediately in the hallway with the other handouts. If changes are made, you can access the minutes tomorrow on the BPS website. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 25th as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the minutes by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll move on now to the superintendent's report. I present you our superintendent, Dr. Tommy Chang.
Thank you, Chairman LeConte. Good evening, school committee. Good evening to everyone that is here in the audience and those who are watching on TV. First of all, happy Teacher Appreciation Week. It's always a great time of the year to celebrate the work of teachers, not only in Boston Public Schools, but across our country. It's also a moment to thank not only teachers, but the administrators, school nurses, school psychologists, and all those who support young people in Boston Public Schools. I know there's a lot of celebrations going on across the school district. I just want to take a moment to also share our celebrations with teachers and paraprofessionals. And you see some pictures up there of the great educators who work with our young people. There were pictures of the educators at the Baldwin Early Learning Pilot Academy in Brighton, as well as Margaret and McGee's in JP. And so just a special thank you to all the teachers for making lasting impact on youth of the city of Boston. I also just want to make a special note this year. There are conversations that are going on around the country that are being led by teachers, and I want to thank teachers across the country for really pushing on issues of equity that we are all facing, especially in communities who are most underserved. So just want to take a moment to thank all the teachers across the country who are doing that work. I think that's a good transition to something I want to share with the school committee. In Boston Public Schools, we are obviously committed to ensuring that the most qualified teachers are leading in our classrooms each and every single day. And just as importantly, we need our teachers to reflect the racial, cultural, and linguistic identities of our young people. And that's why yesterday I had an opportunity to announce a program that We will be initiating this year in collaboration with City Year and UMass Boston, and we're calling the program Teach Boston City Year Teacher Pathway. It is a program focused on BPS students who are considering becoming educators. And the Teacher Pathway program provides a clear path to BPS students who are enrolled in a BPS high school to teacher pipeline. They're currently enrolled in the BPS high school to teacher program, which is a program that exposes our high school students to the field of education, gives them experience as tutors in their high school years. Upon graduation from high school, the students will spend a year as a City Year Corps member before attending college. This pathway will provide our students access to a low-cost undergrad degree and a debt-free graduate education. This also allows BPS to recruit locally, regionally, and nationally for recent college graduates who are interested in teaching in the City of Boston and becoming a City Year Corps member in the City of Boston. The pathway members who complete the program will be duly certified. They will have experience teaching in BPS schools in partnership with a highly qualified mentor teacher, and will also earn a master's degree from UMass Boston, once again, free of cost for their graduate degree component. And as we continue to ensure we are filling this pipeline, this teacher pipeline with BPS students and other young people who reflect the racial, cultural, and linguistic identity of the students in Boston, we continue to do this work, we will have, again, our goal of making sure that educators in BPS reflect the diversity of the students' BPS. Yesterday in this kickoff event, and thank you, Michael O'Neill, for attending the event, we talked about issues of the teacher pipeline currently in Massachusetts. BPS, this is an interesting fact, BPS employs 6% of all teachers in the state of Massachusetts, 6%. Yet, we also employ 49% of all the state's black educators, 25% of the state's Latino educators, and 25% of the state's Asian educators. Also really interesting to know, when you look at the educator, when you look at educator preparation programs in our universities, only 10% of the schools of education in the state of Massachusetts, I should say, students in the schools of ed would consider themselves as people of color. We have a major pipeline issue. And that's why this work is so important. We are saying we're going to do this ourselves, but we're going to work in partnership with a local university that's very committed to the City of Boston, that being UMass Boston. Currently, BPS does have 38% teacher educators of color. That's not where we need to get to, but that does compare to only 7% statewide. And we will continue working diligently to make sure we have a more diverse workforce. This is not the silver bullet. This is a multi-pronged approach, but we will continue trying to figure out more and more innovative programming, and most importantly, inspiring young people who go to BPS to consider education as a career. Lastly, I'll just end by saying that this, our goal is to begin with a cohort of 15 scholars, and of those 15 scholars, we want to make sure at least 60% of that cohort reflects the racial, cultural, and linguistic diversity of BPS students. So it's a start, and we hope to continue growing this program. I think Saren Daly is here. I just want to recognize Saren Daly from our Office of Human Capital. She is the Managing Director of Recruitment, Cultivation, and Diversity Programs. Saren, thank you for your leadership on this. This wouldn't have gone to this point if it wasn't for you. A number of bright spots to share with folks. First, just freshly off the presses, U.S. News and World Report released its annual list of top-ranked schools, and Boston Latin School is ranked as the #1 public school in Massachusetts for the 2nd straight year. Boston Latin School is #6, though Bryant is number 10. Boston Latin Academy is #6, and John D. Bryant School of Math and Science is number 10. We also have a number of other BPS high schools on the top 100, including BCLA at number 60, New Mission at 77, EMK of Health Careers, EMK Academy of Health Careers at number 90, and then ACC at number 99, and BAA at number 100. So, like, it's great to see the diversity of schools in Boston Public Schools represented on this list. Next bright spot. Boston Public Schools has received an award for being one of the most proactive districts in the state when it comes to testing drinking water in schools. And yesterday, the Department of Environmental Protection awarded BPS and the Boston Water and Sewer Commission the, quote, Systems Taking Action to Reduce Lead award for their work in our schools. Back in 2016, Mayor Walsh and I announced that all BPS schools Mayor Walsh and I announced that all BPS schools which working water fountains would be tested for lead at least once per year, which is above and beyond the state requirements. This was adopted into a formal policy by the school committee in June of 2016. Not only are we able to spot issues and respond to them more quickly, but through our enhanced monitoring and infrastructure, we have been able to turn more water fountains back online as well. We have reactivated water fountains at 11 schools over the last several months, and this is all due to the work of our facilities management team and our health and wellness departments. Thank you for being a leader on this. Thank you for making sure the safety and well-being of our students, our staff are our #1 priority. Next bright spot. Yesterday morning, I had the opportunity to join the mayor and Councilor Tim McCarthy and many other BPS leaders to visit BCLA, which is one of our schools in Hyde Park, to unveil a wonderful mural that was created by the students of BCLA, working in partnership with the mayor's mural crew. And what you see on the picture is a mural reflects some of the students that actually helped work on that mural. This is an incredible expression of student identity, of student leadership. There was a story told during that ceremony where BCLA students came together to support a young person who was a student who was detained by ICE, and help advocate for his release. And that young student was there in attendance yesterday. And it was a very moving experience, just hearing about the young people really coming together to help advocate for one of their peers. So just a shout out to the young people at BCLA for their leadership, for their caring of their peers, and then for the incredible artwork that they did on that wall. And that mural is actually in the cafeteria. Next bright spot. Earlier this week, I had the honor of participating in the 7th annual Japanese cherry tree planting ceremony at BPS. This year, the ceremony took place at the Irving Middle School in Rosendale, and we were joined by members of the Fish Family Foundation. The foundation began this tradition in 2012 to celebrate the centennial of the city of Tokyo's gift of more than 3,000 trees to Washington, D.C. And Irving students performed a song in Japanese during the ceremony. They teach Japanese at the Irving. And it also included a speech from Boston's Consul General of Japan, and his name is Roku Ichiro Michii. 42 cherry trees have been planted at BPS schools since the partnership began, and I want to thank the Fish Family Foundation, the Irving Principal Carmen Davis, and all the students and staff who made this event special. Our next bright spot is on May 1st. The BPS Office of Safe and Welcoming Schools hosted the second annual LGBTQ Student Summit at the Boston Teachers Union Hall. We had more than double the attendance from last year, with about 175 students attending from 25 high schools. I'm proud to say that nearly all of our 34 high schools now have a gay-straight alliance group. GSAs are safe and welcoming places for all students, and they help affirm our students' identities. This is something we have been really pushing and really supporting. It is really student-led. I want to thank Danielle Murray, a safe and welcoming school specialist who organized the summit. I also want to thank Alex Kalamaroff, I think his name is. He's the outreach director at Charlestown High School, who also helped plan this event. And of course, I want to thank all the students who participated. And of course, we all support the identities of all our young people, and we want to make sure every single student feels safe, welcomed, and celebrated in BPS. Our next bright spot, that's a nice headshot of Craig Martin. He is our principal at the Perkins Elementary School in South Boston, and he has recently been named the Massachusetts Elementary School Principal of the Year by the Massachusetts School Administrators Association. I think many of you I know many of you have attended the school. Craig became the leader of the Perkins 5 years ago, and under his leadership and the work of the staff there, suspensions and chronic absenteeism rates have decreased, family engagement is up, and test scores are up. Students who are Latino English learners are outperforming their subgroups on MCAS statewide. He's embraced SEL practices. He's networked with Boston Children's Hospital. He is a key member of My Brother's Keeper work in the city. He also instituted the morning mile, so students can get physical activity at the start of each school day. And Craig, unfortunately, is unable to join us today. We plan to honor him at an upcoming school committee, but given that this was just released, I wanted to publicly recognize him and acknowledge Craig on his passion, his dedication, his hard work. Congratulations, Craig, and congratulations to Perkins School community. And lastly, one more bright spot I want to share. I recently had the honor of speaking at the Emerging Best Practices for Bias-Free Schools Conference, which was hosted by Boston Public Schools Office of Equity in partnership with the Boston Educational Development Fund. More than 200 educators from across New England attended. I had the opportunity to share my philosophy as an educational leader and the importance of ensuring our students can learn in safe and welcoming environments free of bias-based behavior. The Office of Equity shared best practices. District's Office of Opportunity and Human Capital, Succeed Boston, Safe and Welcoming Schools, BSAC, and BLS Black were all featured at this conference. We also had 2 keynote addresses, one by the Director of Teaching Tolerance, Maureen Costello, and one of the founders of the National White Privilege Conference, Eddie Moore. Teaching Tolerance, Nellie Mae Foundation, and Himes Foundation were all sponsors of this conference. And even though Senator Elizabeth Warren was unable to attend, I would like to share the opening remarks that she made. I think we're going to play that really quickly.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to join you at the second annual conference on preventing and addressing bias-based incidents at school. You know, this is important work, and I wish I could be there in person, but the Senate is in session today, so I'm working down here in Washington. I wanted to start by thanking Superintendent Chang and Boston Public Schools for organizing this event. To strengthen our schools and to support our students, we've got to work together as teachers, administrators, policymakers, parents, advocates. That's what gatherings like this one are all about. Back before I was a senator, I was a teacher, and my very first job coming out of college was teaching special needs kids in a public elementary school. I got to see firsthand the power of public schools to build opportunity for all our kids. But this can only happen if our schools remain safe and welcoming places for all students to learn and to grow. Today, more than ever, we must do everything we can to prevent hate, to end discrimination, and to stop bullying in all its forms. All students deserve to be treated with respect and to receive the support they need, regardless of their race, ethnicity, sex, disability, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And I know we have work to do to make sure this is a reality for kids in Massachusetts, a reality for kids across New England, and a reality for kids around the country. And that's why I am so glad that you are gathering this week in Dedham to focus on finding solutions. I am committed to being a good partner for you down here in Washington, and I look forward to continuing our work together. So, thank you again for all the work you do.
Thank you, Senator Warren. It's great to have her advocating down in Washington, D.C. And I want to thank again the Office of Equity for hosting this two-day convening. I had a chance to speak to many of the attendees, many folks who joined us from across the state, and this is important work, and it's just another example of BPS leading on these sort of issues. So with that, that concludes my remarks for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any questions or discussion from the committee? Ms. Alva-Davila.
I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to hear about the high school to teacher pipeline. I think we've talked about that at many, many school committee meetings. I know it's small, but I think it's fantastic. We already have young people interested. We have a pipeline, and I think it's a great investment for young people to become teachers in our district and to stay here in Boston. They are the future of our city. So I just want to say thank you. And thank you, Mr. O'Neill, for being able to attend that as well. And thank you to Ms. Daly for all her work. I know she's been working really hard for years on this, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alva-Davila. Mr. McClay.
Good evening. Thank you for the remarks as well. I did just want to point out one thing, that we actually had 3 of our BSAC members mentioned in 3 different bright spots, including Nicholas Twoheads, who's the BSAC president for this year, Bergeline at BCLA, part of the Mural Committee, as well as Alexis, part of the LGBT Summit. So I'm glad to see that some of our BSAC members are representing across the city and other opportunities that they can exhibit their leadership.
And Nick is joining City Year next year.
Yes, Nicholas is one of the students participating in the program.
Yes.
That's excellent. Thank you, Mr. McClay. Dr. Uriarte.
Yeah, I thank again for your presentation. Whenever I hear the fact that our schools of education in the city are really not preparing the kinds of teachers that we're needing, I was wondering. I raised this already with Human Capital. What leverage do we have in our discussions with these schools to raise this issue in an honest way? They use BPS for their training, so they are engaged. They are here and they're benefiting from the diversity of the BPS experience. Yet they don't recruit. They don't recruit a diverse set of students. So I was wondering whether we have former dean of the school right here, but is there room for any kind of discussion about this with the schools of education in the city?
I know.
I think it would be great for Dr. Coleman to weigh in on your perspective on this.
I have yes. One, I want to congratulate Ms. Daly and UMass Boston for taking these steps. This is really remarkable work. But one of the drivers is around what pressure can we put on presidents in the system to say this is of high value for the district and get the mayor on board, because they're really the levers around the ones who control the money that allows for scholarships. I mean, I know my institution, the ability to pay is critical to our ability to create a diverse group, and that money's got to come from the president because it's not coming from anywhere else. And I would highly recommend that you make an announcement about this program and send it to all the presidents and the deans in the areas, and ask how they can join in. I think it's very important and critical. That's got to be an ongoing, regular basis. But it's really the presidents that are the key.
UMass Boston is offering half tuition for all the students who come through this program. And so with the AmeriCorps stipends that they receive, that will cover for that, and therefore they can get basically a tuition-free graduate school education through this process. And we're now in the process of having conversations with colleges and universities who will be willing to figure out a debt-free also pathway for the students. So debt-free through 4 years of undergrad, 4+ years of undergrad, tuition-free for their masters, and they will then become BPS students and start their career in BPS. That's the goal.
But
I
they
appreciate
have
your
to-
suggestion.
we have to put pressure on
Yep.
them to recruit, because if not, nothing will happen.
That's right. And in convenings that the mayor has hosted, he has emphasized the importance of making sure that the colleges and universities are playing these sort of roles, not only for educators, but also for the pipeline of jobs in Boston. So Boston Public School students finding a pathway to and through college into the workforce in BPS, in the city of Boston.
Thank you, Dr. Uriarte. Ms. Robinson.
And thank you for the report. I have another question about the other side of this issue. It's great if we can get them here and get them recruited, but what's our commitment once they're actually in the system? I mean, I worry about each year when we have teachers accessed or laid off. Are we laying off the very people that we've just tried hard to recruit? So is there any kind of way that with coming through these programs and actually taking a place that we are supporting them and giving them some kind of support to say, we're going to keep you in the district 2 or 3 years, or something that's going to make people stay? Because the other side of this I've heard often is that many students of color are discouraged from becoming educators. So that's one reason why they're not in the pipeline, because they don't want to even look at it as a career, because how teaching has changed. So what on the flip side of once you've gotten through all this, what are we offering that says we're really committed to you and to grow you into a really promising and successful educator in BPS?
So BPS, PPS Office of Human Capital, led by Sarah Daly, also facilitates affinity groups through MEOC and WEOC, which are male educators of color, women educators of color. Affinity groups that support BPS teachers of color during their early years in BPS. And I actually work very closely with them. I meet with them regularly. I meet with the coaches regularly. It is one avenue, but there are others as well. Alana, which is a support group, a critical forensic group of educators of color in BPS. The Boston Teachers Union is a huge partner on this as well. And so, again, it's a multi-pronged strategy to make sure that all our educators are supported, but in particular, our educators of color. In regards to this program, we are still in the midst of developing how we're going to support these young people throughout their transition into and through college as well. One of the emerging ideas is to bring them back every single summer to work in BPS, so they remain connected to Boston. So when they do finish their undergrad experience and as they begin their graduate school as they begin their graduate school experience, they have had multiple touch points throughout their journey with Boston Public Schools.
But what happens at the actual school level when those principals or headmasters are having to make decisions about who's being accessed or laid off? Is there any kind of looking there at who's in that pool versus who's staying?
And if you can can be more specific.
You know, I don't know, I don't think we've looked at the data, but of the teachers that get excess, to go into the excess pool, what percentage of those teachers are Black and Latino or Asian teachers, and particularly teachers who may only have been in the district 1 or 2 years? Because I'm thinking that also is a message. You know, if I've done all this hard work, but then there's no room for me.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I can bring that data. I can provide that data to the school committee. I know that what we are doing is we're intently focused on a number of schools that do have a huge disparity between the demographics of their teachers and demographics of their student body, and providing some pretty intense coaching and technical assistance for those schools. And that is not around only recruiting, but it's also around mentoring, is about keep making sure that teachers feel also affirmed and sustained in their work. And so those focus schools are a huge priority, because we know that there are some schools that just need more help in that area. But I'll bring that data back.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Superintendent, I have to say I did appreciate going to that briefing yesterday with City UMass Boston and the district. And as I said at the time, you know, the most innovative ideas are the ones that people stop and say, this answer was right in front of us, why didn't I think of it? So Uber redefined transportation, Airbnb redefined how to stay when you visit. And we had this pressing need of how do we get more young people, particularly of color, who want to be in the teaching force. And yet we had this pool of folks, these young, energetic, smart, driven, focused people who are spending a year in our schools. I mean, talk about the perfect training pool. And yet we all sit here as school committee and say to you, well, you have to do better on this number, you have to do better on this number. You and your team, and yes, Ms. Daly, thank you for your work on this, actually thought of a really innovative solution that as soon as you hear it, everyone stops and says, why didn't I think of that? So I want to give you real kudos for this, because, and not only did you think of it and making it happen with City Year, who's very excited about it, and with UMass Boston, God bless them, they're wonderful partners to work with, as they do with a number of other things with us. But you're thinking through all the implications. So how to get credit for the core members if they spend a second year, how to get tuition half price, so they end up with a graduate degree and an offer to work with us. And we already have known them because they're in our schools. They see our great teachers at work, so they learn best practices in action. So I just want to give you enormous credit for focusing on a problem that we asked you to look at and coming up with the solution that everyone stops and says, what a brilliant idea, why didn't I think of that? So I give you enormous credit for that. And I particularly want to do it in light of two other things that you also mentioned, just as part of your bright spots. You know, you came to us 3 years ago, and you've been here 3 years now, and this is a city that's pretty tough, as you well know, and I say it all the time, and I say it because I can be pretty tough and I can be pretty cynical. And you had a number of things hit you that we never anticipated in the whole time we were talking to you about coming to join us. I mean, did we really think we were going to have water in lead in the water in a bunch of our schools early in your tenure? Did we really think we were going to have an issue at Boston Latin School early in your tenure? And yet, you quietly worked on it in spite of all the noise all around us and people criticizing and pushing us, and yet what happens? We're now being recognized by the state for the policy you put in place on water, for being leading on it, and we have districts around the country trying to copy us on it. And for a district that has 2% of the high schools in the state, the chart you just read to us, we have 7% of the top 100 high schools in the state, and we have 30% of the top 10. Not bad, considering I think there was a very, very senior state leader about a year ago talking about failing districts and why we need to change things. We have a lot of good things going on, and these are all issues you quietly and methodically worked on, and I just want to give you an enormous amount of credit on it, because we're in the middle of a crisis, would be it about water or some of our schools. You know, one of our school leaders was named Principal of the Year in Massachusetts. We have a lot of things going on, and I know you and your team are working on this very methodically and very quietly, but making progress. And so I give you kudos for the water honor, for our high schools being recognized as the stars that they are, and I particularly love that 7 list. I think it was 7 that you read off in the top 100, because we have shining stars across our district that I hope more people pay attention to. And most importantly, this work you and Ms. Daly and others are doing about hiring diversity and coming up with new innovative programs. You said, what's the problem? There aren't enough going into the School of Eds, so how do we go around that? So kudos to you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Dean Robinson.
Thank you for the report, Superintendent. I also just wanted to follow up on Dean Coleman's points regarding college presidents getting involved. I also wanted to just pitch School of Ed deans, but also if we think creatively or strategically about some of the organizations like ACOM, which is the Association of Independent Colleges, in the state, and connecting with organizations like theirs who have a finger on the pulse of those colleges and universities, just to get a sense from the deans of School of Education, from VPs of Enrollment Management, from Alumni Affairs, where our BPS alums have gone on to school. And I know, we've talked about it before because we have lots of folks on our team here who are representative from other colleges and universities. But there is something to be said of connecting, yes, with the president, but then also sometimes the individuals who are doing a lot of the work, and just seeing how we can potentially partner with other executives and senior leaders to see where our students have gone on. Some of our students who are stars at small private colleges, is there a way to highlight their good work and recognize the pipeline in some of the independent colleges and universities as well?
That's a great idea. And in conversations that we have had over the last several years with deans of education, we do put as our #1 priority the hiring of educators who reflect the diversity of our students. I've been so many meetings with deans of education where that's our #1 priority. Many other priorities, but that's our #1 priority.
And sometimes private colleges may have a tougher time recruiting diversity, and so if Boston can come alongside as a potential partner to say, if you do this, we can offer this as well. And sometimes private schools don't have the same amount of resources as some of our state schools, and so coming alongside as a partner could be beneficial.
Thank you, Dean Robinson. If there are no other further comments or discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Dean Coleman. Thank you, Dean Robinson. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Any objection to approving the superintendent's report by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the motion carries. Okay, before we move on now to general public comment, I'd like to first invite our student representative, Mr. Keandre McClay, to present his monthly update on behalf of the Boston Student Advisory Council. Mr. McClay.
Thank you. On behalf of Boston Student Advisory Council, we did want to say thank you to Boston Public Schools for being welcoming to student engagement and student voice. As we know, in other states and even other districts in the state of Massachusetts, student voice isn't really welcomed in the policy-making capacity. So we want to say thank you for all the work that you allow us to do within the district in partnership with all of the departments in Boston Public Schools. And also, we just want to say that, in the last month has been very busy, both locally and nationally, for the Boston Student Advisory Council. All of our seniors have made choices on schools that they would like to go to, well, that they have been accepted to, and that they are going to. Sorry about that. But one of our major accomplishments recently is being recognized by Facebook. And recently we had one of our BSAC coordinators and several students got to go to Mello, California, where they got to present the Boston Student Advisory app, the Boston Student Rights app, to some of the app developers for Facebook recently, just last month. So that was an amazing opportunity, and don't have any pictures of that yet, but hopefully we can share that with you all. Also, we had students who attend the National Dignity in Schools Conference, which is focused on dismantling school-to-prison pipeline through restorative justice practices. So we get to meet with other youth councils from Providence, California, and Minnesota this year where it was hosted. And they also had an opportunity to honor Prince, which has been going on a lot lately. So it was interesting to hear that and their experience. Let's see. Also, the Boston BSAC coordinators had the opportunity, well, BSAC students, along with Dr. Chang at the Emerging Best Practices Conference, the second annual one for Egg Department Equity. And we thank you, Becky Schuster, for inviting us to participate. I sat on the panel with students from Boston Latin Academy, Black at BLS, also YWCA, and also, surprisingly enough, some middle school students from Worcester, Waltham. Oh, Watertown, sorry. So I got to sit on an amazing panel with middle school students from Waltham and the projects that they're doing in their school to bring awareness around race and equity. One of the projects that they shared was a mural that they made showing that everyone's welcome and also encouraging messages for some of the students who have been affected through bullying and some students who don't necessarily understand the impact of race. And that was an amazing experience, and thank you again, Becky. And let's see. At the Boston Area Education for Social Justice Conference, BSAC's members presented our work and facilitate action, organized sessions around our 3 committees, which are Student Voice, Climate Curriculum, as well as Youth Empowered Learning, which is my subcommittee, but yeah. Each session was well attained by BSAC members, educated conference participants made up of teachers, community members, and parents on the activities and how to become more engaged in the design practices around student engagement and protecting your rights as a student. We also got to provide feedback for the ESSA toolkit, which is the Every Student Succeed Act that was developed nationally under the Obama administration in regards to best practices for students. And we launched, and then BSAC played a huge role in shaping the student engagement portion of the toolkit, and it was publicly launched at the end of April. We are excited for thousands of students across the nation who will be better equipped in implementing the change that they want to see in their schools, and particularly school safety, their impact on curriculum development, as well as professional development for parents and teachers. Also, we wanted to mention that through the work of Anissa Sabi-George, BSAC has played a major role in students being engaged at the city level with the budget hearings and providing testimonies at the beginning of the hearings. Just last night, I had the opportunity to present on school safety and sharing my experiences in public education, not only in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I'm from, but here in Boston, and seeing some of the similar trends in regards to school safety and the accomplishments that have been made in BSAC, the accomplishments that have been made in Boston Public Schools, but also the work that we need to continue working on. And we look forward to being participating in that process up until June when the decision is finalized on the budget. And those are my comments for the night. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClay. Are there any questions or discussion from the committee? Well, thank you again. We'll move on now to general public comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Robinson.
You said that all of the seniors have made their decisions, but you haven't shared with us your decision, have you?
Well, actually, let's wait. Because at the next school committee meeting, all of our seniors from Boston Advisory Council will be getting their senior citations.
Okay.
So we can have every senior, including myself, announce our decision publicly.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And that's, what, May 23rd, I believe. So everyone come.
We'll be waiting with bated breath. Ms. Sullivan, general public comment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Lecanto. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak, and I will remind you when you have 1 minute remaining and then 30 seconds. Those who require interpretation services will be allotted an additional 2 minutes. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Large groups addressing the same topic are encouraged to consolidate their remarks or choose a spokesperson to provide testimony. Written testimony is appreciated and encouraged. Please state your name and affiliation before you begin. TV cameras will only record speakers who face the committee. We have 4 speakers this evening, and we'll begin with Lane Banks, and she'll be followed by Tiffany Vassell and John Mudd.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Lina Banks, and I'm a proud parent of 2 students at the Henry Higginson Full Inclusion School. I have attended the last 4 school committee meetings and advocated for BPS support for a higher grounds proposal to secure a $500,000 grant from Boston's Community Preservation Program and coordinate the building of an urgently needed playground for young students at our school. I am here today to update you on our progress and thank you for your support. Attached to my testimony is a copy of a schematic design we submitted as part of our proposal alongside with detailed specifications of our proposed equipment. Our playground's proposal included support of more than 380 parents and neighbors alongside with support letter from the Garrison Trotter Neighborhood Association, an organization with more than 40 years of service in the Roxbury area. We are very excited for this opportunity. Our architect and contractor are ready to start work as soon as we hear about the grant. We are very pleased to be able to include in our proposal a strong support letter from Superintendent Chang, for which we are very thankful. We also appreciate the continuing work by the entire BPS team, especially COO John Hanlon and legal advisor Alyssa Ocasio. Thanks to their efforts, we expect to have a final agreement soon for higher ground and our school community to continue our efforts on behalf of our children. Thanks to BPS support, we believe we have a good chance of securing community preservation grant and build a playground so it is ready in the early coming school year. The Community Preservation Committee is expected to make its recommendations to Mayor Walsh and the City Council on June 5th. We will continue to keep you posted on our progress. Thank you again, and look forward to joining with you in a cutting ribbon to our new playground in the early fall. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Ms. Banks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tiffany Vassell. She'll be followed by John Mudd and Edward Perillo.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
Sorry, type my speech. Okay. My name is Tiffany Vassell. I'm a registered nurse and the mother of Amelia Edmond, who attends the P.A. Shaw Elementary School. My daughter is currently in K2 at the Shaw. I'm here to talk to you about the cafeteria and our need for the My Way Cafe. Over the winter break, our oven stopped working, and when the children returned to school, they were receiving what was termed as a sustainable lunch, which includes raisins, crackers, and hummus. This was totally unacceptable. Breakfast and lunch is often the only meals these children receive for the day. I began to tweet about it to Superintendent Chang and City Councilor Presley, and fortunately, they were able to rectify the situation. We received temporary ovens while ours were being fixed, so the children were able to receive warm breakfasts and lunch. Now, fast forward to today. We were recently overlooked for the new My Way Cafe program, which we are in desperate need of due to being located in Dorchester, not Mattapan. We are on the borderline of Mattapan and Dorchester. One side of our school is on Morton Street, and which separates Mattapan from Dorchester, and the other side is on Norfolk Street. Our school has a Dorchester address. Our school building is 100 years old and is in dire need of this cafe. Our children need fresh foods. Our school has few amenities, but we have wonderful teachers and a dedicated principal and staff who care about our children very much. I'm hoping that my voice can be heard here today and that we will be reconsidered for this cafe upgrade. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, John Mudd, unaffiliated advocate. And before I get to my topic on the achievement gap, I just wanted to also add my voice to congratulate Saren Daly and Superintendent Chang on the development of a new innovative program to promote diversity of teachers. I think Boston clearly is an innovator in these programs. The issue is, how do we bring them to scale so that it changes the actual proportion of Black and Latino and other teachers and moves the needle. It's been too steady and unchanging for too many years. When I worked with City Year many years ago and talked to their leadership and Office of Human Capital, my memory was that they had almost 250 volunteers in the schools. 80% had BAs and 50% were of color. So they may offer a pool, as the former chair suggested, for expanding the program. On the achievement gap, last meeting I testified about the results of the NAEP, and I suggested that it would be important to get a response from the academic departments and the schools division of what they're going to do about these results. And since that's not on the agenda, and since there were a number of the school committee members weren't here, I thought I would bring the issue back to the forefront. I did do in the interim a one-page summary of the achievement gap, in which I do the arithmetic. You see the charts, the bars that go across, and in the beginning, what's the number, and at the end, what's the number, and then what is the difference? Has the achievement gap increased or decreased? And unfortunately, these results are very troubling. You can see it in every one of the four measures, eight measures of Black or Latino, fourth versus whites in fourth and grade reading and math, and eighth grade reading and math. The achievement gap increased over the years of 2003 to 2017. And some of those differences are rather large. In the eighth grade, black-white eighth grade math, the difference is 53 percentage points. There's an increase in 15 and an absolute difference of 15. I don't have much time. More troubling to me, even than this, is the fact that in many of these measures, except in eighth grade reading, there has been a decrease in the actual performance of Black and Latino students in the system as measured by the NAEP results. So you can see that from 2015 to 2017, Black students' scores in fourth grade reading decreased by 5 points. And for those Blacks, for longer years, for like 6 years, in math and in fourth grade math and eighth grade math, the scores decreased again. I would just say that these figures, it seems to me, the goal is not this data. The goal is to understand why and what we can do about it. So I would urge you again to try and get a presentation from the superintendent and the academic and schools divisions. What do we read from this, and what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to adapt it to the cultural and linguistically sustaining practices that we all believe in? Thank you for letting me go.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd. Our final speaker is Edward Perilla.
Good evening, everybody. Well, good evening again, and it's an honor to be here before you. My name is Orlando Perella, and this is Miguel Lopez. We are members of the Community Task Force, and Truly, the reason we're here right now is because of what D&D came before you on April 11 to request through a vote to be given the McCormick Field. So I want to tell you that the Harbor Point Community Task Force is a volunteer resident elected 501c3 nonprofit organization that has represented annually approximately 3,200 Harbor Point residents since 1988. As co-general partner in ownership of Harbor Point Apartments, the task force's mission is to promote the morale, welfare, education, and prosperity of all individuals that live and work at Harbor Point as well as the Columbia Point Peninsula. For the reasons described below, and you have that in the letter right there that you may read at your leisure, this guy said, but we are asking that the task force be included as a value contributor in all discussions henceforth regarding the redesign of the McCormick Athletic Fields. Furthermore, we insist that the McCormick Athletic Fields must continue under the complete oversight of the Boston Public School System. On April 11th, D&D asked BPS committee by a vote to transfer the McCormick Athletic Field to D&D. Please note, this request came to BPS committee with D&D neither contacting the McCormick principal, Mr. Enriquez, the school site council, nor the Columbia Point Peninsula community. We have had a long 30-year partnership with the McCormick School. As Zainab Hussein mentioned to you on the last meeting, how successful Harbor Point has been. Obviously, when they redeveloped Harbor Point, Columbia Point into Harbor Point, there was a loss of fields for the youth and the families to enjoy and to develop. So to address the loss of the former Boston Housing Authority athletic fields at the time, the redevelopment team from Harbor Point Apartments Company reached an understanding with the Boston Public School for use of the McCormick School athletic fields. In exchange for our funding and comprehensive renovation of the facility, Harbor Point youth will have the priority to use the athletic fields when not committed to school activities. Accordingly, the redevelopment team engaged its land architect, Carl R. Johnson and Associates, to redesign and implement the agreed-upon renovations. The original plan dated July 27, 1988 is available for your review. Ever since, as we committed to this, we have maintained the field. We have done all the necessary maintenance. As you can read right there, what has been done, and that's on a yearly basis. 4 times a year, we ensure that the grass has all the requirements to maintain green. We cut it. Same with the playground that we have right there. We eradicated at some point some drug activity, if I may speak openly. That's not the case anymore. And as you can read on the letter, we have periodic public safety patrols of the area. Yeah. I can tell you from my part, I have been in the United States Air Force for about 26 years, about to retire in a couple of years, but I have had the opportunity to travel the world and see, the advantage and the opportunities that youth and families have when you have an open space. And that is key for the development. And we know that as I speak to you and tell you, what other countries are doing, Germany, Japan, Korea, Belgium, it's just amazing, how open spaces really is key to the development of an individual.
Mr. Faria?
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, I'm afraid you're past your time.
Oh, let me finish this. Now it's evident that discussions are underway with undisclosed parties interested in the McCormick Athletic Field, which Mrs. McCrary and Dillon described to BPS committee on April 11, 2018 as dilapidated and underutilized. Clearly, this is not the case. Quite discouraging to hear this characterization of an athletic field that under the best of circumstances has propelled our youth to be successful contributors of our society. Given the long history of collaboration between Harbor Point and the McCormick School.
If I can interrupt for a second, if you wouldn't mind just summarizing, we do have the letter that we can review at our leisure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jules, basically say that we want to be part of this. We have not been knowing that we have been such a great contributors, to the well-being of the residents and the ones that live, work, and and study in Columbia Point. Also, I want to mention that the Fish Family Foundation and the Japan General Council, they planted trees in the McCormick School as well, and we take care of that very much. So
Right,
I
thank you
really
very much.
appreciate, the opportunity, and we look forward to continue the discussion, and I appreciate, your support. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
forgive us for taking more than what it is.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan.
Mr. Conto, that concludes our speakers.
Well, thank you again. And our first action item this evening is the consent calendar, which consists of grants for approval totaling $75,000 and 2 international travel requests. I'll now open it up to questions or discussion from the committee.
Mr. Chair, may I
Yes,
just strictly...
Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I just strictly congratulate the district? We keep talking about foreign travel. I love to see on both of these trips that we have in front of us tonight. In one of them, they're staying with host students, host families, and they're actually spending time in a host school, going to class in the host school, and they planned the trip in reciprocity for students to come down here. And in the other one, they're also spending time in a host school. So this is exactly what we're talking about, not just doing tourist attractions, but really digging in and doing something of meaning. So congratulations to the department that's working on student travel. Love to see it happen.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. And I should note as well that the superintendent and I were speaking just earlier about a tentative agenda item that we have coming up for a full report from the International Travel Office on the success and expansion of these programs over time. And so we'll be looking forward to that in one of the next 3 meetings. Any other questions or discussion from the committee? Well, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Is that a second from Ms. Oliver Davila? Any discussion or objection to the motion? Any objection to improving the consent calendar by unanimous consent? Well, hearing none, the consent calendar is approved. And our next action item is the Massachusetts School Choice Plan, for which we just held a hearing. The superintendent has recommended that the district hereby withdraw from the Massachusetts School Choice Program for school year 2018-2019 due to lack of available space to accommodate non-residents. Now, just to be clear, as we've done this in previous years, a yes vote means that the district hereby agrees not to participate in the choice plan, which has been the decision of the district as well for a number of years. This is the process we have been using I believe since the plan's inception. Unless there are any further questions or discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation. Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila. Is there a second? Thank you, Dean Robinson. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Oliver Davila? Mr. O'Neill? Jerry Robinson?
Yes.
Ms. Regina Robinson? Dr. Uriarte?
Yes.
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Our final action item this evening is the closure of Dorchester Academy. Now, you recall at the last meeting, Deputy Superintendent of Strategy, Dr. Donna Muncy, and the Executive Director of Strategy, Dan Anderson, presented to the superintendent's recommendation to close Dorchester Academy at the end of this school year. Remaining students will be placed at Excel High School, which is expanding its alternative education program. I'll now turn it over to Superintendent Dr. Tommy Chang for any final comments.
Thank you, Chairman Lecanto. I want to thank the school committee for having a thoughtful conversation at our last school committee meeting about this difficult decision. Closing a school is never easy. Just as a reminder, Dorchester Academy was a comprehensive high school in Boston Public Schools. It moved into level 4 status in 2014. Because the school was serving primarily students who were off track, Dorchester Academy in essence became an alternative program operated by ABCD, but it was still bound to state accountability measures for traditional high school. So it was a school that unfortunately could have never come out of level 4 in its current makeup. The size of the student body was just too small. Currently, it was too small, and that made it impossible for the school to test enough students to exit level 4. Currently, Dorchester Academy has 15 students. Nearly all of them are on track for graduation by the end of the year. The school has had an amazing year. I've been very involved in meeting with the young people, watching their progress. There's a incredible staff. They want to stay together. They want to take their expertise in the programming to Excel High School to support the turnaround effort at Excel High School. They will not be the program will not be a standalone school next year. It will be part of the Excel High School programming. This supports the turnaround plan at Excel. We know in Boston Public Schools we need to have strong programming for off-track youth, both in the traditional school environment and also, as many of you pointed out, in alternative school settings as well. There is a need for both. And so we remain as a team committed to that effort. As the school committee expressed in the last meeting, these alternative settings are important for many of our young people where the traditional school setting is not being effective. And I heard you loud and clear, and I completely agree. But this evening I am asking for your support to officially close Dorchester Academy and for that programming to move over to Excel High School.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any further questions or discussion from the committee? Questions?
Quick question.
Mr. O'Neill.
Superintendent, just from a high level, in light of your comments just now, do you have a rough idea of when you'll be back to the committee with a full report on your plans for alternative ed?
Yeah, we will have a plan specifically on how we will be supporting off-track youth, which includes alternative education, and that report will be presented to you and to the general public before the end of the school year.
Okay, and that will include a redesign of alt ed or refresh of plans or?
Yes, it will include updates on ongoing work with alternative schools and kind of a timeline for a redesign effort for the rest of the schools. But we already have some redesign efforts. Greater Eggleston's in the middle of redesign, Dorchester Academy's in redesign. BDEA is actually in the midst of a grant to help them expand their programming. So we will give an update, a comprehensive update on that work.
Thank you, and I appreciate in your comments, in your recommendation for this vote, you reflected the fact that you heard those of us who really spoke quite a bit about the importance of having a strong alternative ed and a strong program for our off-track youth overall. So thank you for reflecting that. It pains me, obviously, to vote to close a school, particularly an alternative ed school, but I understand what you're doing with this and the work that you and your team are doing with the other schools that you mentioned. So I support your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Are there further questions or comments?
Yes, I do have one question.
Oliver Davila.
Thank you. I wanted just to get a little more clarity from the presentation that the question that kept lingering. So in the last presentation, there was a comment around having more staff than students when we came back this year. And so I was curious about why in that instance we didn't actually bring in more students if we knew that the staff ratio was more than, that could actually take on more students, given that we constantly hear about the re-engagement center and others, students not having a place to go. And I was just curious what was the thought around that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been doing this year is making sure our re-engagement center is providing options to our students and set them up for success. And the school, Dorchester Academy, is focused on young people who might be overage and undercredited. And that really became the hallmark of the work, and that will continue to be a hallmark of the work. Students were provided the opportunity to attend Dorchester Academy if they were in 11th and 12th graders. We kind of capped it. We didn't put in, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Muncy and Mr. Anderson, if I get this wrong, we did not place 9th and 10th graders there this year. We only placed 11th and 12th graders this year. And so that they were focused on the older kids.
Did we place new 11th and 12th graders?
Yes, there were some new. Were there any new 11th? Do you have a sense of how many numbers? Or Mr. Fuentes would be able to tell us. Were there any new 11th and 12th graders that were enrolled in Dorchester Academy this year?
Really, were there any new students enrolled?
This year at Dorchester, we had the continuation of students. There were some disengaged students that had been at Dorchester that came back, and that was it. We did not expand because we ended up with a staffing of 5 core teachers that were working with them and working on the individual needs that the students had.
Right. So at the last meeting, one of the comments was that there were more staff, there was much more staff, a bigger ratio of staff to students. So because, and I heard part of it was there was individual needs that were large, So I'm just wondering, was that the reason why there were no new students recruited? Because there were larger individual needs. I'm just trying to understand why if you have more staff.
The students that remained had a variety of needs. Some of them were extremely acute needs. We had students that actually we had never even imagined the level of fragility that were there. So there was a focus on their needs. There was also a shift to really thinking about how to get students to accelerate. So staff changed a lot of their roles to do more engagement, mentoring, almost direct counseling and support with students as they were doing the academic. And then the other piece, it was a key focus on helping students try to complete work in areas where they had major challenges. And that was, I think, the impetus of the work that was being done, and we didn't add any major number of students. We were also focused a lot on old and close. And that population across the district is not one that is bountiful. It's the group that is less bountiful. So that was the 2 pieces that we were working with.
So then that determination of not bringing in new students, that was not made at the beginning of the year then? That must have been made?
I think we started the conversation somewhere, I'm thinking somewhere in between October and November when the faculty focused and we did an in-depth analysis of all the needs of the 30-something, 40 kids. We figured out that this is what would be our focus. And then we kept it at, it's going to be the old and they have to be close, and that meant that everybody, DP could do that, Boston Collaborative could do that, BDA could do that. Why come to a place now and try to insert into a culture when we're focused on this particular group?
If I could add, we also, because we made a lot of changes with the school over the summer, at that time, at the beginning of the year, when there certainly was a certain amount of mobility as students were preparing for the coming school year, we weren't adding a lot of students at the time that we were making major changes with the school because we were focused on making effective changes at the school.
Okay, I just wanted to understand because I think if I was listening, watching this at home with my wine, drinking my wine, I would want to know if there were more staff. I think it's good for people to know, what does it take, and I think that was a good explanation, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aldi-Davila. Dean Robinson.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight to just answer a few questions. Is there, and I apologize for being out of town and missing the meeting, and unpacking a bit of the engagement with family and students? It looks as though there were phone calls and letters. Has there yet been an actual in-person community meeting face-to-face?
We've been working with students from the beginning of October to now on interfaces with all students and home visits. Faculty and teachers, Ms. Reese, they are constantly out. Actually, as of yesterday, we looked at every student and their progress to graduation. We've reached out to the families. This is a constant of the school, and it's the culture of the school. At the last couple of meetings that we've had families come in and speak to that end because they've seen the difference in the engagement with them. So we're pretty engaged. We actually see what's happening, and we talk with students on a regular basis. And visit homes. This is what the difference with this group is. These teachers actually are out visiting the homes and checking in on their kids.
And just moving forward, what will you all do as the farewell celebration to kind of cement the legacy and the journey of this group of people, since you spoke to the fragility earlier, how will you specifically speak to the value of their journey now that there's a bit of a Band-Aid being ripped off?
Yeah, we've done that in first iteration. Dr. Chan was actually part of our first group of folks that actually completed all their work. Our graduation is basically at the very end of school year. We've pushed it back so that students that are with more courses can complete as much as they can. And then we're going to do a major celebration with that graduation, really recognizing that. It's been a very trying experience, and it's been a very unique experience and a rich experience. So we've had a lot of the young people really connected and continue to be connected even though they finished.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Robinson.
Can I just say really quickly, make sure Brandon knows that I got his note, and I'm looking forward to having lunch. He is the valedictorian of the school, and we're very excited to celebrate with him.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes. I'm sorry, I also was not here last time, but I have a couple of quick questions. You said there are currently 15 students left at the school?
Yeah, we have on the average right now, there's about 13 students. There are some that are actually in a satellite working out of with the DP. We have 3 students at the DP site working at that in Dorchester. And then the other core here, we have some students that have just finished that are extremely fragile but completed all their work and just got their MCAS scores and they were fine. So we're working with the ones, we have a couple of right now portfolios that are going forward. We've got some we're waiting from the state to hear from them, and working with some of the distinct dynamics that we're facing. For those students that we don't see can complete immediately, we're taking them on with the group at Excel, and in addition to that, we're also planning some intervention work over the course of June, July, to give them a 3-week, 4-week to work window, so that if they can't finish by June, they'll be finished by August. We're really moving the group of students to graduation.
So, if I understand you correctly, all of the current students that you are working with will have completed all of their requirements by August. So
That's our goal.
That's your hope.
It's been hard pushing. There's 1 or 2 students that are having challenges because they have, we took one student that came in with less than 10th grade credit and actually has moved within 4 courses of graduation. Whether or not that student will be able to finish by August is really going to be trying, but that's what we're pushing for.
Question, I think I have more for you, Superintendent. Are there other schools that are alternative schools that may be facing this similar kind of crisis?
I do not anticipate any.
So as we go forward to look at our alternative education, we'll be able to include the kind of education that was happening at Dorchester Academy as part of some of our other programs or as part of Excel, et cetera, moving forward.
One of the potential ideas is that group of educators work to refine their model as part of Excel, potentially for expansion at that school, or maybe incubate a new school model. That to be determined, but it is a group of teachers I have personally met with a couple of times this year, and because of their collaborative spirit and their willingness to work with this population, we felt it was important to invest in this group of individuals who wanted to work together. And there's additional cost to the school system, but it was the right decision, I felt. So I made that recommendation to keep them together.
Thank you.
And Superintendent, to your point, there was, in the discussion that we had at the last meeting, in identifying Excel High School, there was a population identified there that would mesh well with the teaching that was going on at the existing program at Dorchester Academy. Isn't that right?
Yes. It's a place where we have a large number of students who would benefit from alternative ed, and I think the superintendent has said correctly, we're really looking at how we're going to invest, how we're going to expand, not just what we're doing with Excel, but how we're doing across the board in the redesign. And that's what we've been doing in the last few months in terms of gathering the alt ed directors at schools to provide us some framework about where's the direction of growth and what does that mean in a long-term plan. And that was what we're working with Dr. Muncie and Dr. Noriega with to present to the superintendent and then to this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Dr. Urete.
I wasn't here last week either, so my question is really, do we understand what the trajectory or the process that brought us to this situation with the school? Do we understand that well? What made the school fail? Why are we doing this? The reason that I ask is that last year when we were considering, I think it was last year or a year and a half ago, we voted or talked about the sort of taking this school out of the hands of ABCD. That has a strong trajectory of working with these populations. And to tell you the truth, it crossed my mind at that time. I said, well, is this the end of Dorchester Academy? And, we sort of went on and people, were talking, but should we have acted at that time? Should we have done something at that time? Should we have done something before? When do we know it's time to intervene in a school that is failing? And what kind of supports can we give them? Were we committed at that time to make Dorchester Academy succeed, or were we just, moving it along?
So I was not here when the decision was made to take an open enrollment high school and reinvent it as an alternative school as a turnaround plan. But the reality is, if you look at the enrollment numbers, they plummeted after that transition. And so we had an accountability issue from year one of Dorchester, of ABCD, inventing their new program. We had an accountability issue, which is most students who are entering an alternative education program have already had an MCAS test at least once, and sometimes many times. Mm-hmm. The only accountability that counts is your first time MCAS test taking. So we've never tested enough students at Dorchester Academy to produce a score that would indicate to the state whether we were making progress in remediating the things that had led the school into turnaround in the first place. So when I talked to ABCD, I was part of that we made that decision at the end of last school year, and it was because they too were incubating a model, a new model, and they weren't able to really get a good test of that model because they were suspended between what they wanted to do and what we would have needed them to do in order to produce an actionable test score, which we really don't even know how many students we would have had to enroll according to the criteria for enrollment in that particular alt ed program to get enough first-time test takers to actually make a difference. So the school was being evaluated and I don't want to say evaluated, but it was being observed and visited not just by our team, but also by the state team, which could not compile any information. So when we made that decision to end the relationship, it was immediately after that we began trying to work with the 5 teachers who remained to figure out how best to serve students that were still at the site, knowing full well that if we didn't have a testing pool, we were probably going to be at risk of going to level 5. So a lot of things we've done, we're going to do a more substantial after-action review. We did an after-action review last summer when we went through the process with ABCD. But a lot of things have been learned about how to respond when a school goes into level 4. And probably the most important one is not to put your most fragile population in those crosshairs, okay? And so I feel like the decision to close the school, but to move the population that may still be there, the 2 to 3 students that may still be there, over to the program so they are allowed to finish the program they began at the pace they need to be successful is our best option at this moment. To be honest, one of the things we learned from this, we wrote into the plans that we wrote for Brighton and Excel last year when we were working with the schools to write the level 4 plans. And that was that we needed to make sure there was a part in those plans that took head on the question of how we were going to serve the off-track youth at the schools. And so this piece of work that will be, this group of teachers that will be moving over to Excel will be helping to support the off-track students that are there. Again, most of those students will have already taken MCAS. None of this will be actionable against the progress Excel is going to be making towards exiting level 4. Is it perfect? Probably not, but we'll learn the new lessons from this, but it's a much better opportunity to provide a strong, what we believe is beginning to be and will continue to grow to be a strong alternative education program to students who need that environment, but not in a high stakes environment that's at odds with the goals of the program.
You know, panic rose again when, I didn't realize, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together. Excel is one of the schools.
Correct. And part of it's
placing too much burden on that school by having them adopt this program?
This is a support opportunity for the school. They're going to they're going to be identifying up to 40 students from the school to receive these services. That will actually do something that the program was struggling with this year. The students at Excel want to attend school at Excel. Most of the other programming that we were making available to them through the first attempt to figure out how to look at the alt-ed program was going to require them to go off-site. So we actually believe this is a really good, positive step. Again, you always learn both what was right about your assumption and what turns out to be the absolute best thing you could have done are not always completely aligned, but we think this is a real positive step in providing more support for the off-track youth at Excel and giving a very promising program an opportunity to continue to do its work and grow.
I'm just hoping that we're not sitting here next year, analyzing what happened to Excel High School.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand what I mean? Are we just complicating the situation because it's, we go over this every time we have these situations, or we have schools that go from level 4 or at risk of being level 5. But I still don't understand exactly what it is that we should be doing in order to support the school.
So we're actually tomorrow, I believe this is right, tomorrow the state is actually doing a walkthrough of Excel, as they do with all of our level 4 schools about this time of the year. But we've seen a lot of very encouraging things happening at Excel and at Brighton this year that we feel are laying a strong foundation for the improvement of those 2 schools. So I think that we can bring you data and we can bring you information about what's gone on this year at both of those schools before the July recess, if that would be helpful. And then we will keep you informed of how the conversations and the merging of the program into the school happens. It will be done with taking all the lessons that we've learned into account and being open to continued learning. I don't think it will be a disruptive force. I think it will actually be a welcome addition to a school that wants to keep its students rather than send them elsewhere for off-track youth supports.
And Dr. Uriarte, if I can add as well, if you recall from a couple weeks ago when we had our retreat to talk about the calendar, we scheduled for shortly before the end of the school year a conversation on what the district is doing for its low-level 3s, 4s, and 5s. And I think that'll be a perfect time for us to discuss this matter.
When will that conversation take place?
It's in one of the remaining meetings we have here in May, June, and July. So I'll get the exact date after the meeting and respond to you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Uriarte. There are further questions or discussion? Well, I want to thank Mr. Fuentes and Dr. Muncy and Mr. Anderson for joining us to have this conversation. I know this is a bit disjointed and different from what we usually do in these situations, but given the attendance of members at this meeting and the last meeting. We appreciate you bearing with us. I also appreciate, just giving us the background, particularly with respect to, as Dean Robinson asked about the painstaking lengths that the district went through with respect to family outreach, home visits, multiple calls, and guidance for the students that remained at the school over this last year on an exit strategy, not only on a path to graduation, but also to alternatives for enrollment in the future year if that comes to pass. These are tough. I think I'll go back to where Mr. O'Neill started us off with comments this evening. It's never easy to take a vote on closing a school, and as we know, Dorchester Academy, as Dr. Muncy pointed out here just a bit earlier, has been through a number of years of challenges, particularly with respect to the way in which we hold up a yardstick to the school and how it performs, and that's the state measures that we utilize to measure all of our schools. So we're faced with tough decisions, and I think the saving grace that we have here is that we do have on the horizon a conversation to be had around off-track youth, at-risk youth in our system, and how we can service those students. It's great to know that this model that has been incubated for a number of years will still live on, and that we likely have a population that they can immediately serve next year. And so if that happens as a part of the Excel community going forward, I think that's a great thing, because we'll still be using a program that we have put the time and effort in on, and we'll be servicing a population that needs it. So if there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation to close Dorchester Academy at the end of the 2017-2018 school year as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Coleman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion?
May I just, Mr. Chair, may I just make one quick comment?
Yes, Mr.
In
O'Neill.
reply to a comment that Dr. Uriarte made, because I just want to let you know that, and I know you were not able to make it the last meeting, but we actually did talk fairly extensively over the concern you raised tonight about were we just, in effect, transferring a problem to Excel, and we specifically, as a committee, talked with the district about Excel a few years ago merging with Monument, and the lesson learned from the state on that, and that the state did not adjust the goalposts for Excel, which had been doing very well based upon the combined population. So I just want to let you know, in fact, we did dig into that last week, and I think we, as a committee who were here, got comfortable with the fact that it's literally only just a couple of students who are moving, and it is a faculty from Dorchester who have become quite experienced in working with at-risk youth. So they're actually now bringing something to Excel that Excel is pleased with. They're going to take some of the Excel students and have them work with these faculty. So I want to make sure that that was mentioned, because it's a concern literally we were thinking about last time, and I know you weren't here for it. So I just want to make sure you had heard that we had thought that through and talked it through.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. I believe there's an additional comment from Ms. Oliver-Dowler.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to say, I think that we should absolutely take some lessons from this experience. I think, again, I don't work at ABCD, so and I'm not in this partnership, but just from an outside perspective, that we were the ones that asked them to come in and take over the school. And I think it's very challenging when they went in. Students were reassigned. There were about 374 students that were on the books. They were reassigned. They only had 53 when they started. None of them were ninth graders. And I think we just need to be really clear in our memorandum, and we have to take responsibility that I think we were trying to put traditional measures on a school that is not a traditional school. And so this decision does not feel very good to me. I don't take it lightly. It just does not feel right to me. And I really think that I take your words very seriously, Dr. Chang, in terms of making sure that we do not, that this is not the only model, that putting a school in another school cannot be the only model for alternative education students. And I look forward to having discussions on this, because I do think that when we look at this particular population, I believe that these students should have some significant weights attached to them as well, in the same way that we view ELL and SPED students. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver-Davila. We do have a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation on the floor that has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion or objection to that motion? Hearing none, Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Oliver-Davila,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Jerry Robinson,
Yes.
Ms. Regina Robinson,
Yes.
Dr. Ariarte,
Yes.
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. LaConte.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, and thank you once again, Mr. Fuentes, Mr. Anderson, and Dr. Muncy for stepping up this evening. We'll move on now to our first report, the BPS Performance Meter. At this time, I'd like to invite Jacob Stern, the Director of Performance Management for the Office of Data and Accountability, to please step forward with his presentation. First, I'll turn it over to the Superintendent for opening comments.
Thank you so much. Tonight, we will provide you an update on the Boston Public Schools Performance Meter. The Performance Meter is a set of core metrics designed to monitor the student performance district-wide and build coherence around common goals with a focus on achievement gaps. The Performance Meter is meant to be first phase of looking at bright spots and issues within the system. It is not meant to be the only data we should be looking at. It should give us some emerging impressions about where we are doing well as a system and where we are not. These metrics will increase transparency about the progress the students are making or lacking in critical areas. I think it's also important to mention that I wish this work would have come to you about a year ago, but given all the changes with state metrics, what we've been trying to do in pushing for more innovative metrics and also doing the engagement needed across many sectors and getting many stakeholders to weigh in, it's just taken a lot longer than I would have hoped. But glad to at least get to this to, I don't want to say a finish line, but a major,
Good
milestone, thank you, a milestone. So thank you so much, Jake, for leading this conversation tonight. And Jake is the Director of Performance Management in the Office of Data and Accountability. He will be leading the presentation also. He is joined today by Nicole Wagner, I think you all know, Mark Racine, Head of OIIT, and Krista McSwain, who is the Executive Director of the Boston Opportunity Agenda. I just want to make also a quick note. Nicole Wagner is transitioning from BPS at the end of this month. He is going to be welcoming her second child and will be moving back to her home of Michigan to spend more time with her parents. And so it's not only going to be a loss for, not only going to be losing Nicole Wagner, but we're also losing her husband, Tom Lamb, who works in our Division of Special Education on engagement. So both of you a big loss. Both of you be missed, but thank you for helping us take this to this, the performance meter to this key milestone. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Chang, and thanks for having me here tonight to talk about the performance meter. We're definitely excited to get it off the ground. Really, we have to start with our end goal in mind, and I think if we had only one metric on the performance meter, it would be having our students graduate college, career, and life ready. Members of this committee and members of the public at large are familiar with this work. This is important work led by the Boston Opportunity Agenda and Kristen McSwain, and really is our North Star for our work with the performance meter. As you can see on the slide, really the subtext: to prepare our students, we guarantee that they are reading by 3rd grade, participating in rigorous, enriching, and inclusive programming during their elementary years, and focusing their high school years on rigorous academics that meet college-ready standards, as well as high-quality career technical education that prepare them for lives after graduation. So this really has guided our work as we think about the metrics that we assess throughout a student's K-12 trajectory at BPS, and has kind of been our North Star pointing us along the way. So the performance meter really helps us identify the big goals for students at BPS. We want to closely focus on opportunity and achievement gaps. We must use authentic and accurate evidence to keep us laser focused on achievement gaps. And so this will really complement some of the existing tools and kind of give us a shared scoreboard to all kind of build coherence, make sure we're speaking the same language, and be focused on the same result. It provides measurable, ambitious goals for external as well as internal stakeholders, and will to help us track our progress towards our goals. As you may be aware, high reliability organizations throughout all sectors have key performance indicators that they're able to really measure the things that are important to them and that have specific actions as a result of those indicators. It's a really important tool in building a performance management culture to help us engage in a cycle of continuous improvement in order to reach our goals. Again, the performance meter is meant to be a district scorecard. It is aligned with the state accountability framework as well as our school quality framework, but it is meant to give us a quick indication of where we're at as a system and really be transparent in that work. The intent and the direction we've gotten from Dr. Chang along the way is to have a concise set of metrics, so really be able to focus our work. Obviously, we have other data, diagnostic data, as well as formative data that helps us drive our decisions, but this concise set of metrics will help us all be focused on the same thing. So over the last couple months, we've had about 17 meetings with BPS community groups, as well as internal teams that represent diverse stakeholders, including some of the members on the school committee tonight. While there certainly is not unanimity on what should go on the performance meter or its best use, we've heard all of the feedback and have brought it back to the team working on this. And I'm sure as folks are seeing it tonight, they're probably aware of some of the changes. We've been very transparent about the metrics with all of the stakeholder groups, and we've taken their feedback into account. So we've picked a couple quotes here that we felt like exemplified some of the feedback. And one of some of the many themes that we heard along the way, obviously the focus on the achievement gap was one of the kind of critical topics throughout all of our meetings. And one of the real takeaways for me, and I think for the team, was that, there is no the achievement gap, right? So the achievement gap means something different to different stakeholders, and a real important takeaway and something we're incorporating in the performance meter is to be flexible and show the performance of different groups and different gaps and make them very visible and transparent for stakeholders that are interested. And so it will allow us to be both focused on the achievement gap as well as flexible to make sure that we're measuring the progress of all students. Other feedback that we heard really from many groups, and I think this was underscored by the diversity of groups that we went to, was not only to focus on innovative measures like college and career readiness, for example, but we really do have work to do around the transparency around some of our performance data that is pretty basic and really gets at the core measures that we have as a district. While some of this is already public data and is available in multiple different areas, showing it for student subgroups as well as explicitly measuring the achievement gap really does have a lot of value for the BPS community. Also, again, meeting with BSAC as well as other organizations, they really brought home for us how we display the data and how we, the context that we put it in is really important. Making sure that it's clear and transparent. That, again, that underscores the point around the concise set of metrics. So we're not losing the forest for the trees, if you will, that we're able to focus and make it readily available for all audiences. So without further ado, we'll get into the metrics. So this is our concise set of 14 metrics that assess some critical junctures in a BPS student's K to 12 and even to post-secondary trajectory. These are, as I said, this has been a collaborative effort. We've worked with many BPS departments who work every day on this work, and have made sure to incorporate kind of research-backed measures that are correlated with student success, both secondary and post-secondary success. And as I said, it does not measure everything that we care about for BPS, but it does get at some critical junctures that we feel give a good indication of the health and the progress of the system overall. And we hope that it gives you the high-level information that will help kind of monitor the progress of the district. You'll see in the vertical list there are the kind of K to post-secondary trajectory, starting with kindergarten, going through 3rd grade ELA, 5th grade science, 8th grade math, 10th grade, that's meeting the competency determination. So that's the students passing the English, math, and science MCAS, which is a requirement for graduation, so giving us an indication of our the on track for graduation. Obviously, some of the summative measures as well, like 4-year cohort graduation, the college career and life readiness definition, and then ultimately that lagging measure of whether our students are actually graduating from their post-secondary programs. And that includes bachelor's degrees as well as 2-year degrees and other industry-recognized certificate programs. Below that, you'll see a number of kind of critical supporting measures that really get at throughout a student's trajectory at BPS. They get at some key indicators of how we're doing supporting students in BPS on this trajectory. So some of these are a little bit more innovative. Not all of this data has been released publicly before, and I think it really is a measure of how Dr. Chang and the district is committed to transparency that we have, that we're kind of coming out and putting all these measures out there for the public. So obviously things like teacher diversity, as was mentioned earlier, is a critical measure. Family engagement is a new measure. We've kind of an innovative measure using some items from the parent climate survey that get at both parents' perception of engagement, how engaged they feel, as well as measures of their actual engagement, whether they're actually coming to school and being engaged in events. We also target specific populations such as English language learners and students with disabilities to give indications of some of our work with those groups. Another metric I'd like to highlight is our students with 94% or better attendance. This is kind of a new metric that we're really proud of because we feel like it really differentiates a lot better between where we're at. It's not just a kind of overall attendance rate. It kind of draws a line in the sand of, all right, and aligned with the work around college career readiness, a student with 94% attendance, we're kind of drawing the line with that is where we consider good attendance, and how are we doing with overall and on that. It gives a lot better sense of how we're doing on attendance, which we know is a very critical measure. And obviously suspension rate, again, another indication of social emotional support, as well as our culturally linguistically sustaining practices. And all of these measures will be disaggregated, and we will look at achievement gaps for each of these measures. So in thinking about these measures, we really did a pretty deep dive analyzing our own data, and we're kind of going to give a little taste of that today. We did a lot more than is kind of represented in these slides. So one way to think about our performance on these measures is to think about how we compare to other districts in the state, particularly some of the larger, more urban districts. So these are the 6 other largest other districts in Massachusetts and how they perform on a selection of measures. Not all of these, as I said, some of these are more innovative measures where we don't actually have data across the state on those, but this is a selection of kind of where we're at compared to some of our peers. You can see especially some of the newer measures, the next generation MCAS tests, since we don't have a lot of historic data there, it gives us an indication of our performance, and we're really excited to learn more. And in some of these measures, we're performing a bit better than our kind of peers. In some measures, we have some work to do. Some of the measures that are not on here, such as teacher diversity, for example, we're actually outperforming many of our other, and these 6, as well as the state overall, in terms of our teachers of color. For metrics like students with disabilities in inclusive settings, we still have work to do. But that's just one of the ways we thought about these metrics, especially as we really worked to draw targets that were both ambitious and achievable. So that was part of the work we did. Another way that we looked at these metrics is obviously analyzing our own historic data. So some of these metrics, as I mentioned, with the next generation MCAS, we didn't necessarily have historic data, but for the measures that we did have historic data, we did look at the BPS trajectory. This is an example here of our 4-year cohort graduation rate, which I think is a real bright spot for the district. And we've seen, you know, if not linear growth, we've seen consistent improvement in our 4-year graduation rate over the last 5 years and even further historically. Another way we looked at our performance was among schools. So looking internally in BPS, we wanted to see the bright spots as well as the areas where work needed to be done to kind of get a sense of what it would take to really move the district. This is just 4 metrics. We did this for obviously all of our metrics for multiple years. This is looking at the kind of distribution of performance. Each of one of those blue lines on these 4 charts that are on this slide represent an actual BPS school in 2017, and you can kind of see some of the different examples of distribution for these metrics. So not all of them are normally distributed, and obviously with the different programs we have in different schools as well as the different size schools that we have, they disparately impact the overall district performance. So when we think about moving this data and really hitting our goals, we have to really you know, break it down to an individual school level to understand that. Again, these are the metrics we looked at earlier. These are looking at that K to post-secondary trajectory, and I think I'd like to make the case that we've made aggressive and measurable targets. That is really, I'd say, an exception across urban districts across the country. You know, we've also, another piece of research we've done is looking at goals and strategic plans for districts across the country and kind of situating our work both within the kind of Council of Great City Schools districts as well as other urban districts around the country. And not a lot of districts are actually laying out measurable, ambitious targets and being transparent about it. And I really think that, you know, to drive a culture of performance management, we can't just be pie in the sky and say we want to have 100% achievement in every one of these districts in the next 3 years. While that is a kind of aspirational goal that we all share, it's really important to lay out measurable goals where we can hold ourselves accountable and kind of be driving towards the same thing. So we've laid out some targets, so annual targets, and then a 5-year goal. There's a graduated improvement here, and these really are ambitious goals that really bend the curve of our historic performance. So I'm sure, you know, we can walk through each of these individually, but you'll see substantial improvement kind of in line with where we saw with the graduation rate improvement over the past 5 years. So if you saw it was about a 1.4 percentage point graduation, 4-year graduation cohort improvement over the last 5 years. We're expecting to continue that trajectory upon the great work we've already done. And then kind of we've looked at how that fares across these other districts as well as how we compare with the previous, with the other districts that we showed, as well as nationally for places where we have it, to try to make pretty consistent goals across there. You can see, for example, in 5th grade science, we have more than a 50% improvement is what we're expecting over 5 years. The supporting measures, the other kind of critical measures that we track along with our student outcomes are equally ambitious. The top line there, suspension rate. You may know that we've had a kind of consistent improvement, so a decline in our suspension rate for all students over the past few years, and that includes all subgroups of students. So we're down to about 3.7%. We put round numbers here, and our ambitious goal is to continue to have that, so be at 2% in 5 years. So we are laying out very ambitious targets as well for suspension rate, as well as attendance, English language learner progression, et cetera. We know these are key measures that really underlie our progress towards our ultimate goals of closing achievement gaps and ensuring that our graduates are graduating college and career ready. So we think it's ambitious to set ambitious targets here. So as I mentioned, it's not only about the numbers, it's not only about all the data analysis that we've done to create this performance meter. A lot of the work is also about being transparent and making sure that we are all rowing in the same direction, and that work is being undertaken by the Office of Data and Accountability team, particularly Monica Hogan, who's here tonight, who's our senior analyst for performance data systems, and she's done a tremendous job in really starting to lay this out in a way that is very clear and transparent for folks, making sure that you are able to look easily and clearly see where our gaps are, where we are making progress, and where we expect to go in the future. So we've started to develop that. It's still very much in draft form, but we wanted to share that tonight with folks. We have a screenshot in the packet, but I know you have a small screen up here, but for the audience online, we can see a little more as well. So this is a bit of a mock-up, but it shows, I think it gives a good set. So this is how it will look for each metric. So we intend to have a kind of landing page that a community member as well as internal folks will be able to go to and see a quick and kind of readily available sense of where we're at, what explicitly including where we're at in terms of achievement gaps and allowing them to define that themselves. And then also they'll be able to drill down into individual metrics. So what I'm showing now is the kind of drill down. So this is an example of what we expect to look like for graduation rate right here. So as you see here, they'll be able to click and see individual metrics. They'll be able to dive down deeper to see how we're defining those metrics. Up at the top here, you can see these are our actual last 4 years of 4-year graduation rate data, as well as this is our mock-up of our goals moving forwards. Below that, you'll see disaggregations. So not only will we explicitly measure the achievement gap on the landing page, you will also be able to see the history of our progress or lack thereof for each subgroup. So this is looking at different racial groups and their actual 4-year graduation rate history for the last 4 years. They'll be able to use a drop down here and, for example, look at it by gender. If we want to see how our male students are compared to our female students, the user will be able to see that. And for various other groups here, it'll be a live measure. And as I said, we can kind of toggle between these groups. If we want to look at suspension rates, for example, we'll have each metric here, and we'll be able to see our progress for the last few years for all students, as well as different subgroups of students. For example, we know students with disabilities is a real focus for suspension rates. We can click on disability status, and we'll be able to see how our students with disabilities are being suspended or not being suspended disproportionately. And so we'll be able to do that for all of our metrics. It'll be a public platform that will be available on the website. It's still currently in progress, so we're definitely interested in hearing feedback about this, as well as the content of the metrics themselves. The intent. Screenshot. So the intent is to have this published with both that landing page that we don't quite have ready for prime time yet, with all metrics as well as our progress and the achievement gaps, as well as the drill downs with historical data, disaggregated data, as well as targets. Published and on the website in June. So obviously this is something we've been working on for a long time, and though is not something that we don't anticipate working on in the future. So we will, sorry for the double negative, but we will continue to, work to incorporate new measurements as they become available. There's obviously a lot of the feedback we've gotten, and a lot of the things that we feel internally are to measure many different things that we'd like to include. But we want to continue to update this, make this more available, and make it and hold ourselves to it. So thank you very much. I hope it does provide a kind of shared scoreboard that you will find useful, and we're certainly eager to hear any feedback.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stern. I'll open it up now to committee members for questions and discussion. Dr. Uriarte.
This is really interesting, and I'm very happy to see that we're going to have it on a regular basis. I just have some questions about the metrics. For example, why did you use a 4-year cohort rather than the 5 when the 5 is also a stronger measure?
So that is our kind of most traditional graduation rate metric. That is the expectation that and the majority of our students do graduate within 4 years. So and that it's aligned with our accountability for the state as well. And to obviously we care about 5-year graduation rate, as well as a new metric the state is looking at is extended engagement. So that's the students that we continue to educate even after 5 years. Though kind of keeping with our thinking about the performance meter overall, we do want to have a concise set of metrics, and really holding ourselves to increasing the number of students who graduate in 4 years is the metric we chose.
Because the state presents both.
Yes.
So
And we will certainly continue to track both and provide that.
on the ELD, the English learners, are you expecting, looking at the results, 30-some%, are you looking just at levels 1, 2, and 3, all ELL?
Yeah, and I probably should have explained this one further, because this is also a little bit of an innovative metric. So what this metric measures is the percentage of students who are moving at least one ELD level per year, or flipping, or going from a ELD 5 to fully English proficient. The expectation is that a student, once they enter Massachusetts, becomes fully English proficient within 5 to 7 years. So you wouldn't expect to see 100% here, because it's approximately one ELD level per year, not exactly one ELD level per year. But it is looking at all ELD levels, including from going from ELD 5 to flip.
But then you think 38 or whatever, I think it's 30 some under 30 or close to 30%. Don't you think that's very low?
So I would say that the target is actually a very aggressive target when we look at how much improvement we. Yeah, so we're at.
We're currently at 20. Yeah, we're currently at 28%, and our goal is to increase it in the next 5 years to 37%.
So that's and we could.
Are you happy with that? The percentage. I'm not.
So I would note that the change in the access test this past year has,
is that the issue? Okay.
So, and similar to the MCAS performance, where we don't, it's a little hard to predict how we expect to perform, but we, I think, really didn't want to shy away from putting aggressive targets, despite this being a new test. And I would say both for the ELL access metric as well as for the MCAS metrics, despite not having all the data we would like to have because it is a new test, I think we really did lay out some aggressive targets considering our current performance.
But this is using access, not.
So this is using actual ELD level, which is, as you know, is primarily defined by access performance, but also takes into account the greater information that we have as a district. So while the state only looks at access performance, we were able to look at the ELD level performance. So we actually have a little more information and think it's a better metric than what the state is looking at.
When do you predict that this will be online?
June.
By June.
Yes.
And you will continue to update it?
Yes, so most of these metrics are annually updated. They come throughout the year, but we will continue to update it.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Uriarte. Ms. Robinson.
Thank you for your report. I had a question on the kindergarten to post-secondary trajectory. And my concern is we say that kids are in the 64% rate at kindergarten dibbles. And then if we project out in 3 years, there's only 33% of them who would be proficient at ELA. So I guess my concern is, do we need some other kind of measure to figure out what's happening in first and second grade? Because if we're dropping that much at the beginning of a child's educational career, it's not surprising that we see the small, you know, the 30% or less that we're getting along the way. So
Yes.
what's happening?
Yes, we absolutely do need a better measure of early literacy. So DIBBLES is a measure, and Mary could speak to it, but of kind of early literacy skills. But we've actually released an RFP and are currently reviewing proposals for other assessments of actual reading comprehension below the 3rd grade level, so we have a better sense of our students' actual reading comprehension.
And I guess my other question was, do we need, particularly in kindergarten and 1st grade, do we need a more comprehensive set of assessments, particularly about when we're looking at math and science, you know, later on, about what are we putting into our kids in the beginning to give them a strong foundation so that they will perform later? Because it just feels like, I mean, to see something drop off by half, seems like there's something that we're not providing.
So that is part of the RFP, is to have a more comprehensive set of assessments for kindergarten through 2nd grade. We do now have a fairly robust set of interims and a platform that is, the items come from measured progress, so it's very aligned with the state assessments that goes from 2nd grade through 8th grade. Another thing for consideration in looking at the drop-off is that we currently, the curriculum for our early childhood is our in-house curriculum, which has been nationally recognized focus, which we've been gradually rolling up. So this year we're piloting that curriculum in 2nd grade. And the hope is that, you know, by taking students through that same frame of curriculum through all of the early childhood years, we'll see stronger results in 3rd grade.
Another question is, usually when we see this data, you know, the 3rd graders are different than whoever. So that, you know, to me, the numbers reflect who's in the pool in that year. So whether it's, you know, it's not really telling us the truth, whether we're really making progress or not, if the demographics of that 3rd grade group is different from the 3rd grade the year before. So is there a way that we're going to be looking at this data, say, for the class of 2030, who are the kindergartners now, so then, well, we look at them independently and say, okay, we're going to look at their 3rd grade, 5th grade scores, so we can really have an adequate, you know, picture of what we're actually doing with that group of children, not just sort of a general.
Yeah, so certainly we do look at our students through cohorts to examine their kind of trajectory throughout their years in BPS. I think we also have a measure, student growth percentile, which able to give us a kind of individual year assessment of our progress. I think you know, our thinking around the performance meter is to really hold ourselves accountable for how we're doing with this group of students. So not to just have to look back after, you know, 12 years in the system, but say at 3rd grade, what % of our students are meeting expectations for English language arts, and expect ourselves to increase that number.
And another measure I'd like to see is just for the, particularly for the kids who've gone to BPS from kindergarten to 12th grade, to really just look at that group that's been with us from the beginning to the end, regardless of kids who've come in and out, to say, how are we really doing with students that we are responsible 100% for their education?
And there has been studies of that as well, and I think that was actually one of the things I was thinking when you mentioned the difference between DIBBLES and our 3rd grade performance, because that is one of the factors there as well. We know that students who are enrolled in our K1 and K2 classes, as well as even kindergarten K2, do perform better than their peers who are not enrolled in BPS programs.
And are they doing well at 3rd grade, or will we learn that soon?
Yes, yeah, we have already.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying,
yeah,
and I don't know where they are in that.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say this is probably not a surprise to my fellow members who have young children, but Ms. Robinson, that was the first time I heard someone refer to the class of 2030. Wow. Anyway, thank you,
have
Mr.
one of
Stern.
those.
I know, that's why I figured you and Ms. Robinson as well, but, and Ms. Oliver Davila. So, anyway, Mr. Stern, thank you for your presentation. I'm really heartened by this. I think all the data shows that districts that perform well and boards that perform well do it when they pick a couple of key indicators and religiously focus in on them. Too often, boards, and we're very guilty of it here, we jump all over the place. We ask for data on this, data on that, data on this, data on that, whatever the latest hot trend is. And I think the more we boil this down to a couple of key indicators that everyone agrees on are going to tell you how the district is doing or not, and we then relentlessly focus on it. So those should be what we then use to make policy decisions, and the district uses to make implementation decisions, and quite frankly, what we evaluate the superintendent on. So these goals should tie to your evaluation, superintendent, and Mr. Chair, at some point, you know, I'm sure we're gonna have a upcoming meeting about, it's during the superintendent cycle about goal setting and everything. We should align all this together. And as school committee members, we should be able to recite these 5, 6 things off the top of our head as individual members, right? And say, what are we tracking? And every presentation should be around that. And I come from the school of thought that third grade literacy is the cornerstone of so many other things. And so, and I see you almost smile a little bit, Mr. Stern. I guess this has been a conversation within the group that worked on this. And so I get back to Ms. Driscoll, if you could join us again for a moment. Getting at what Ms. Robinson just said, you know, I'm interested in your thoughts about, you know, she was reflecting on, boy, at Dibbles we're saying 65%, and then also we dropped to 29 or 64 and 29. But I'm thinking they're probably completely different tests.
They
right?
are,
And
yes.
They're tracking
Yeah,
different
they're
stuff.
measuring
So
very
it's almost
different
like
things.
apples to oranges. And we're not.
Definitely not becoming.
What in your mind, as a professional, experienced educator and superintendent, I'm interested in your thought as well. What is really the best way to measure third grade literacy? I'm not talking about a state test. What is the best way to measure third grade literacy?
A single measure?
Or is there? And that may be too simplistic an answer, but
That's a very difficult thing. I don't know if there is one best measure, but you are looking at reading comprehension, you're looking at fluency, you're looking at a number of different factors, and MCAS is based on the state standards, so that's what we're teaching to, and we should be aligned to that. Now, I think one of our challenges and opportunities is the alignment of focus curriculum to expeditionary learning in third grade, and so that's been work over the last couple of years as well to make sure that the focus curriculum, as it's moving towards second and then third grade, will be aligned to the EL curriculum that is being offered in our elementary schools, in 80% of our elementary schools.
yeah, this is a really hard question, right? Do we just pick a state measure because, well, that's what the state does? But by the way, you know, you just referenced MCAS, and then there's PARC, and there's revised PARC, and what's the state test going to be next year? And we don't know, but I think we need to think hard about what are the absolute right things to measure, and what's the best way to get a measurement on it that's fair and across the board. And I'm not talking about adding new assessments. We have plenty of tests right now, but really thinking hard about each one. I mean, I love the framework. And by the way, the temptation of all of us is going to be, I love this, and by the way, can you measure this just one thing more?
Right.
Like I'd love to see something on here about arts or enrichment, right? Are we measuring how many of our students have exposure to arts or enrichment or something? I know all of us can very quickly say, love it, can you add 1 or 2 things more, and we have to be.
I think that's actually in the school quality framework, so we are measuring that. Coming, yes.
So, I mean, that's
Talked
just an
about
example.
it last night.
I think we have to be very careful. I love the idea of keep this simple, and you have 2 different pages of things here, the supporting measures as well, and pick the 5 or 6 key things, and then relentlessly report on it and tie it to everything we do, as I said, superintendent, including your evaluation, and make sure all of us know it and can recite it and hold the district accountable for it. But it should be measures that makes sense and that you can make instructional decisions off of it.
And one
not
thing to
stuff we
note
do just because it sounds good.
about the third grade ELA MCAS is that it not only assesses reading comprehension, but also writing. And, you know, writing, of course, is another foundational skill that students need to, you know, at third grade really be ready to not just comprehend what they are taking in, but be able to express that understanding in writing.
But just to play devil's advocate, what happens a year from now when the state changes the tests again?
The state actually will be using MCAS 2.0 for the time being, unless there's some major shift in policy. We don't anticipate anything. There's no signals of that. Last school committee meeting, we also gave an update on our last assessments in 2017 on the NAEP, and showed a correlation between MCAS results and NAEP. So we do believe that MCAS 2.0 is an improvement and is better aligned with NAEP and also other internationally benchmarked measures. It's the best that we have right now. And
Yeah, because NAEP, all of our students don't take NAEP.
No.
Right, so
No.
we can't use that.
No, we can't use that. It's a certain number of students at almost every single BPS school in 4th through 8th grade for reading and math every 2 years.
So again, I'm very supportive of this. Love the work on it. I just want to make sure we really think through exactly what we're tracking, and that each one of those tied to how we make policy decisions, how you make implementation decisions, and how we track them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Ms. Alvarado.
Sorry. I hope I'm not losing my voice. Thank you so much for this presentation. I am going to go against what Mr. O'Neill said and say that although I understand his perspective, and it's a good one, I also feel that, and maybe it's digging deeper down into these and I don't see them because it's a much higher level, but I also want to be able to see certain patterns that we can work on. So for example, when I look at on-time grade promotion, that's going to tell me like where a student is faring. When I look at students being kept back, when I look at where I'm not sure where this fits in because this is so academic heavy for me, I have a hard time digesting all of that because I think there's a lot of other pieces, like if I look at who is homeless, if I look at what students were taken out of their home, and so how do those pieces affect some of this, and I don't know if that is drilled down within those. And I'm not sure if the college and career readiness piece, is there going to be places that measure how many internships students have, how much dual enrollment they have, how much college guidance? Because if we're really talking about college and career ready, I mean, that's just a big blurb.
Yeah, so I can speak to that one specifically, and Kristen could also come up here to kind of give more of an explanation. But that is, as I think you've been involved with that work, and those measures that have been kind of approved and publicly announced are what make up this measure, students graduating high school, career, college.
So if you drill down, they will be in there.
It will.
The higher.
That is what they're.
It will be like an index of GPA, attendance, internships, exposure to rigorous coursework. It's going to be indexed.
Great. I just wanted to make sure because I wasn't sure.
We hope to have that by our launch in June.
Yeah, I didn't want to assume anything. And the other pieces are around. This is great to share for families, but also I think somehow putting in the different strategies of how we're getting to this, because otherwise, you know, if I was looking at this as a parent deciding whether I want to choose BPS, it doesn't tell the story, I don't think, if we're not putting also some of the examples and strategies. And then you mentioned that you had talked to some external partners, and I was just curious who that was, who was included.
So this is the full list of including externals as well as internal teams. They are all kind of BPS based teams, not external.
Will you have non-BPS based teams to kind of?
We're certainly happy to meet with additional groups that would like to have us.
Okay, great. Well, because I think that this is, when we talked what Mr. O'Neill mentioned, I think like the enrichment pieces, the enrichment as an example, I mean, I think there are many partners, because I wonder how, if I look at, for example, if you know, we were going to look at, let's say there's a pattern in like middle school transition. I don't know, we see down the line like students are not going into 9th grade for whatever reason, they're being kept back in 8th grade, then I wonder how do we use this to connect back to other partners. So I think just having those conversations as we go along and sharing will be really important. And then I would really like to see the teacher diversity broken down. That's just too big of a lump, and like to figure out exactly what we're talking about, what that means. And then for family engagement, I would hope that we would not look at the traditional measures that we're looking at now. I would be a terrible person to use as family engagement. I have not gone to any meetings at my daughter's school, but I text with teachers all the time. I'm the first parent in the morning. I go on every single field trip. I just can't make those meetings at night. So I really hope that it would be more than that. It would be really looking at how are teachers communicating with families. That's not just like come to the school and meet with us, or come to like a open house or whatever, that we're talking about home visits, that we're talking about some other non-traditional measures.
It does include those. So it both the perception piece around whether the family feels engaged, I think would get at that communication piece you're talking about. And then in terms of the actual engagement, it does measure the meetings, but also the field trips, for example, that it would count that type of activity as well.
So like texting with your teacher, or Skyping, or like a teacher going to meet you somewhere for coffee. I mean, I just want to push this a little bit more, because I think that if we look at like the number of meetings or I'm lucky that I have, you know, a fairly flexible job. I can go on all the field trips, but that's not every family. And so, thank you. So just to, I think about, there's a lot of new, you don't have to come up, it's okay. There's a lot of new research around family engagement that I think you can just look at, and just, that's all I'm just encouraging.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver Davila. Dean Coleman. Excuse me, Dr. Coleman. Oh, the speaker.
Professor Coleman.
Yes.
Guy. Just quickly, this is very exciting. Everyone knows I'm excited about it, so I don't want to go in good detail. The issue of independent variables versus dependent variables, there's lots we can talk about. But the thing I want to comment, I want to thank the superintendent for putting together a team that's able to do this work. 5 years ago, I don't think the district could have done this. And this is a capacity and a skill set that, if you do believe in performance meters as a driver of overall improvement, you need the capacity to present the data, listen to the flexible questions that people are asking, and figure out how to do it together. This is a huge accomplishment, and it's very exciting. And Nicole, we're going to deeply miss you. You've done a wonderful job of putting this together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Go Big Blue.
There were a lot of cats that heard at this, to this point.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. And are there further questions or comments? Well, thanks. I'll just simply echo the comments of my fellow board members. You know, it's really great to have simple KPIs that, as Mr. O'Neill pointed out, especially we can utilize in a number of ways. And certainly as we go through the meetings that we hold on a regular basis, the presentations we receive from the district, being able to drill down into specific data that, you know, is easily recognizable and relatable between the factors that you're giving to us is, I think, really going to be important for us. The one thing I wanted to follow up on, and this is a question that Ms. Oliver Davila began, was the definition of college, career, life ready. I know that's still under review and development. The important thing that I want to note here, as you continue to develop that, is the underpinnings. I heard Dr. Chang mention GPA, a number of other factors that you can you can benchmark against other districts. I think it's important as we look through all of the key metrics that will go into the performance meter. They are objectively able to be benchmarked against other districts, against other jurisdictions across the country. I think when we, if we want to take this, and I think it's a very valid measure for us to take forward, because it is key to what our mission is here in the district, I think we want to think about where we can best position that definition and the key metrics within that definition that go into that measure, to be able to start to try to approximate how we are holding ourselves out against other districts, both in the Commonwealth and across the country.
If I may, there is emerging research in this area, and we also want to long-term thinking about it, the incorporation of SEL metrics as well into our college career and life readiness definition. But hopeful that this area of research will become a lot more clear and a lot more public over the next few years. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Superintendent. And thank you again, Mr. Stern. We again deeply appreciate the work that's been done by the Boston Opportunity Agenda, the Office of Data Accountability, the district over time here, and you know, certainly echoing the comments of Dr. Coleman. This is not work that we could have done a number of years ago, and so certainly we praise you for the long hard work and all of the help that's come from our stakeholders and partners, both inside and outside of the district. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing the performance meter roll out soon. Okay, so we'll move on now to.
Oh, yes. We also just thank Ms. McSwain from the Boston Opportunity Agenda, because you mentioned partners, but
yes,
the example of you've learned how to pull data together from disparate groups and put it in a scorecard that people can understand easily. So thank you for helping on this. I apologize, sir.
No, not at all. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. We will move on now to our final report this evening, and this is an update on the Columbia Point school properties. Now, for members and members of the public that recall, we last discussed the district and the city's proposal to entertain a public-private partnership for development of the parcel on Mount Vernon Street in Columbia Point at the April 11th meeting. And we had Dr. Makima McCreary, our Managing Director of External Affairs, present that proposal, along with the Chief of the Department of Neighborhood Development, Sheila Dillon. As you recall, we intended to explore how some public-private partnership, which is something that we haven't endeavored to explore in the past in the district, might make use of underutilized land within our district. And there were a number of discussion points that Dr. McCreary and Chief Dillon highlighted for us that would benefit the district, and chiefly the Dever and McCormick schools that are adjacent to this underutilized parcel, as well as the surrounding community. And we heard from Harbor Point tenants earlier this evening, as well as at the last meeting, their keen interest in this parcel, which, as the gentleman pointed out earlier this evening, that Tenants Association has been taken care of for a number of years and has made active use. My understanding is our Chief of Staff, Mr. Consalvo, had an opportunity to speak to the Tenants Association after their comments this evening, and have been able to explain to them a little bit about what I'm about to talk about this evening. Something else that Dr. McCreary, excuse me, Dr. McCreary and Chief Dillon were able to include in their presentation was the idea that development of this parcel, if it comes to pass, would not negatively impact the build BPS possibilities for either of the existing schools that are adjacent to the parcel. The Dever and McCormick are both parcels that are, schools that have been reviewed through our facilities master planning process, and both buildings have been judged to be expandable for future grade reconfiguration considerations. So through that, by way of all that background, through our discussion that evening, a couple questions arose from committee members. The first one was what is the appropriate time for the district to convey or surplus the land over to the city's custodianship for the purpose of entering into an RFP and potentially conveying this land to a partner for development. And so what I did along with the superintendent was seek a legal opinion from the legal advisor's office, who worked with the city's corporation counsel's office as well, to develop a legal opinion for us, and that's been distributed to all of the members as under attorney-client privilege as an advisory on our legal rights in this regard. And I'll come back to that in just a second. The other item that was raised by the committee was, what was the community process? What has been the community process to date in reaching out specifically to our schools that exist within this community, the Dever and the McCormick? And so shortly after the April 11th meeting, the superintendent delivered a letter to the leaders of both schools outlining our plan, outlining the presentation that the district and D&D has made, and providing that presentation to the school leaders for distribution within their communities. So in essence, at this point, they know what we know. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit more about tonight was, based on what we've learned about the community process to date, as well as the legal opinion that we've received from the city and the district, is what do we believe to be our reasonable path forwards. So the legal opinion is helpful in the regard as it answers the question about what steps we might need to take in advance of issuing an RFP. And the way that the proposal was first presented to us was that we would need to surplus or convey the land, we meaning the district, and the committee acting on behalf of the district, to the city before an RFP could be issued. But we received an opinion that we do not need to surplus the land prior to issuing an RFP, which is a helpful development in understanding how we can process this proposal and retain some control over the management of the RFP, the terms that go into it, and more importantly, manage control over what the responses are that the district and D&D receives to that RFP. In essence, we'll be able to control, and the district will retain control over the relevance and meaningful contributions that any proposal that would come as a result of that RFP process would make to the mission of the district at large and the schools that are being impacted specifically. So that's a helpful development. And given that development, I am now proposing that the committee will vote on a resolution at the next meeting that would direct then the district to work with the Department of Neighborhood Development on an RFP and develop that request for proposal on the parcel jointly, and use as part of that process the D&D community process that has worked in similar accessing and sale and surplus efforts all across the city for a number of years. And specifically the district's family engagement office and the individual schools would be part of the outreach that would happen both within those individual school communities as well as the larger Columbia Point community. Through that process, BPS would then retain custody, as I mentioned earlier, of the land. The resolution that we would be proposing, and I've asked Ms. Sullivan to work with our legal counsel on this proposal, would specify what the property is, what restrictions the district intends to place on the conveyance of that property, and specific to that, the restrictions would be essentially a benefit to the schools that are adjacent to the property, and the resolution would then, of course, authorize D&D to issue the RFP. During that time, the district and D&D, again, as I mentioned earlier, will be able to do some outreach to the community, Harbor Point, the Devon and McCormick communities, as well as gather input from the committee in the development of the RFP prior to its distribution. And if the RFP results, the proposals that we receive back after that RFP is issued, meet our requirements, the committee would then take a second vote to authorize the transfer of the land, again, if it's satisfactory to us. So I wanted to sketch out what my vision is of how we might proceed forward based on what the initial presentation was from the district and the department on April 11th, and the developments that have occurred since that time with respect to the legal opinion that we've received, and what we've learned about the community efforts to date. And so I want to offer that out to the committee for comment and discussion, and if the committee would be in favor of moving forward in this regard, we can then schedule a vote on that resolution for the next meeting, and we'll distribute that resolution for your review in advance. I also want to note Dr. McCreary could not join us this evening, but Mr. Consalvo is available if there are any specific questions about outreach and the efforts that the district might make with or without the department to speak to our impacted school communities. So with that, I'll open it up for questions and discussion. Ms. Oliver-Davo.
Yes, thank you. I feel very apprehensive about moving that quickly, to be honest. I think just given the testimony, and we did ask these questions at the last meeting about how the community was involved. I would prefer a slower process to make sure that the community is actually part of the conversation. And I'm trying to have an understanding when, sorry, I don't know if I missed, you might have said this in everything that you said, but in terms of the question of why it has to go to D&D, I was just wondering what the community I don't know. If we can find out what is the community concern around that, I'm very curious. I heard tonight in testimony that they wanted it to stay within our hands and not D&D. I don't know. So if you could just find that out, that would be great.
I can answer that question. So the distinction is, I believe what the Tenants Association was responding to was what the initial presentation was. And the initial proposal and presentation that we received on April 11th asked us to authorize by a vote the transfer of the land from the district's care and custody control, I think that's the appropriate phrase, to that of the department. And that would then kick off the RFP process. So essentially the district was asking us, based on what they knew at the time, to be the practice to transfer the land. What we now know, based on the legal opinion that we've received from the city, and obviously that information hadn't been shared with the Tenants Association prior to this meeting, is that there's no need for us to transfer the land. So we are not going to step into that take that radical step.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry I missed that.
No, please.
Yes, so I mean, I would prefer to not vote at the next meeting. I think that we should give some time for the community to have a conversation on this. It's, you know, just based on the fact that the community has been taking care of the park and it is part of the neighborhood, I would have concerns that we are just not being inclusive and we're not listening and we're not working in partnership and making sure that, you know, this task force and anyone else in that neighborhood is invited to be part of whatever discussions are held.
Thank you, Superintendent. So a couple items on that note. So, you know, the thought process is this, and I agree with everything you're saying, and this is all with an eye towards trying to do service to that idea, which is D&D's got an established practice here, and it's much like what our practice is with respect to our family engagement efforts in our individual schools. But this is a property that would impact not only the adjacent schools, but the neighborhood as a whole. Through the RFP process, which we would develop in partnership with the impacted communities and impacted schools. The development of the RFP is done through a community process. So the community is not reacting to the RFP. It's co-creating the RFP. And so the idea of a vote for next week would be to authorize the district to enter into a partnership with DND to develop that RFP and then issue it. And that process would include this extended community outreach. And Mr. Consalvo, you know, you've worked at DND previously, and you're well aware of this outreach. And so, you know, if there's specific questions that we might have about, you know, what that process looks like, I'm sure Rob would be happy to step up and speak to that.
Thank you for clarifying that. I just want to make sure that, you know, the neighborhood, because I think, you know, I do think we also have to be careful what we say, because as quoted in this letter, when we said it was underutilized, et cetera, that we just have to, so if the community is included, then I am okay. But I just want to make sure that they are.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver-Davila.
Thank you.
Dean Robinson.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Chang, what was the feedback that we heard from the school or the principal, the families, the parents?
We haven't gotten that feedback. That's the next step.
Okay.
I'm sorry, was there another
No,
question?
I would just like to hear that when it comes.
Dr. Uriarte.
Very simple. Why are we doing this?
So, the presentation that we had at the April 11th meeting, and Mr. Consalvo, you might be helpful here in helping me to recall all of the attributes of Dr. McCreary and Chief Dillon's presentation. This is an opportunity to, again, make use of an underutilized piece of land. It's not a piece of land that's going to be relevant to build BPS plans around those existing properties. And it's an opportunity, first and foremost, to enter into a public-private partnership, the likes of which we haven't had an opportunity to do in the past. So,
again, I mean, this is, that area is an area that is in the process of being developed
right
now, very strongly, with a lot of investment. So I'm wondering why we're doing this at this particular time.
Right.
Is there a reason? Are we going to make money? Are we, you know, my question is if this is, you know, again, I mean, if it goes out to bid or what the process will be. If it's not something that's related completely to BPS, will we be selling the land? Does the land belong to us? Does it belong to the city? What, you know?
It's the property is currently the property currently.
Question: who stands to gain here? Because you don't play with land in a place that is so so contested at this point.
So the piece of property is owned by the city of Boston currently.
By the city of Boston or by BPS?
The city of Boston, under the stewardship of BPS. There is who stands to gain? Hopefully, young people in the community, because the opportunity here is to enter into a private-public partnership to do to build something on that piece of property that continues to be city-owned and is done with the community to develop whatever that community wants. Now, there are things that have surfaced, like we would love for like a renovated athletics facilities. There is some athletic components on that field, but it's it needs to be further developed. So there are opportunities really to look at partnerships that would build something that the community needs, keep it in city, like it would still be owned by the city, but it would be a joint use, hopefully more used by schools, but also be used by community as well.
And I would only add, Dr. Chang, that, you know, we did a study of how many schools are around McCormick-Dever on a 1, 3, and 5 mile radius. So the idea that any kind of a public use there could be enjoyed by both McCormick-Dever, but other school children within those boundaries, or really anybody, but also folks from the community, Harbor Point, the individuals that testified before. and we so appreciate their testimony because they're passionate and really concerned about what's happening here. They also have an idea and a vision for what should go on that site, so they as a group at Harbor Point are thinking about and actually have a proposal that I think we're eager to see as part of this process of what they would like to see those athletic fields look like and what can be done with that property. And what I assured them outside is that any process we undertake to renovate, or any process we take that's going to allow renovation of those fields, they would be a part of. And they have a right to show that proposal as part of that process, and maybe that's incorporated. But they were really critically wanted to make sure that the community at Harbor Point had a voice in the process. I assured them that they will. Just piggybacking on the D&D process, I know Chief Dillon and her team do amazing work, and they work on disposing parcels all the time. Any parcels that come into the city, whether it's for tax title, foreclosure, or surplus, by a vote of the Public Facilities Department, get assigned then to D&D, who does the care and custody of all of these parcels. There's somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 parcels that the city is currently under care and custody of, and D&D will often run community processes on how to dispose of those properties, whether it's for a community garden, whether it's for a neighbor next door buying it to extend their property, whether it's for things like the Neighborhood Homes Initiative, which is going on right now to dispose of city-owned parcels for affordable housing. They have a really strong and proven track record about how they run a community process. And in this case, the chair was right. There isn't an RFP that we have yet. The RFP will be determined by this engagement and community process that our engagement team, our communications team, and D&D, who will run that process, will work towards to determine what that RFP will look like. So Harbor Point will be able to participate and say what they would like to see. The school committee will be able to participate. The city council and our legislative delegation, and of course all the residents in the community, will all have input on what an RFP could look like. Only after everyone has come to agreement will an RFP actually then get issued. And then at that point was where, again, the school committee, as the chair said, would have another vote and a voice as to what moves forward. At the end of the day, if the community can't agree on what the use should be, and we, through a really exhaustive process and an engagement process, can't decide on what we want, then we still retain care and custody of it. It stays just like it is. But, you know, we would be remiss if we didn't try this sort of creative opportunity to see, is there a nonprofit or some other person who wants to come out, partner with the city, and provide something on that site that benefits our kids, the neighborhood kids, and kids all across the city.
Just to put a fine point on that, you know, you asked the $1 million, probably $15 million question, you know, given the neighborhood, you know, the intent here is not to sell out to a housing developer, not to sell out to, you know, a mall developer or some other sort of commercial development. Our intent here is to develop a RFP that is restricted on its use to specific activities that would benefit our schools and our community.
Yeah, but once you put it into a community process, housing's the #1 problem in the city right now. So that, you know, what I'm saying, what control will we have that it will become an apartment building?
It's a great question. I think we control that destiny. We as a group, school committee, city councilors, legislative officials, and D&D, and the mayor, Chief Dillon, all control that process, and we can put any controls and restrictions we want on it. I think the idea from the very beginning, the whole premise is not housing and commercial, but it is a public use that enhances and supports sort of that athletic effort there to be modern, to be upgraded, to be something that is brand new, that's something that kids for generations and school kids and community kids can use as a real access to public open space.
Again, I mean, that would be great because there's nothing like that on Columbia Point, you know, in the peninsula, but, you know.
Thank you, Dr. Uriarte. Ms. Robinson.
No, I think you answered my question that it would be, I'm not saying restricted, but the priority would be to continue to have the usage be similar to what is now in some kind of enhanced way.
Yep, absolutely.
Right, and that there will be a very strong community process. And that we'll try to find out how to be sure that all or most residents actually get some kind of notification. I mean, in my own community, I've been part of some of those, and I'll find out that my next door neighbor didn't even know. And so, I mean, I'm hoping that we'll figure out some way of making sure there is adequate information given to all.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge and critical point, and I thank you for bringing that up. I think D&D does an amazing job on their communication processes, and they run a really effective engagement process. we can help with that. I think our team would be committed to doubling that effort to make sure that the communities we serve and we work with are notified. The communities that they serve and work with, we would certainly work with the Office of Neighborhood Services to make sure we're identifying all the right people within that community. I think between the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, our engagement team, DND, and even now tonight with our friends who we met and spoke with from Harbor Point, who were committed to making sure the Harbor Point community was notified and has a role in this. And again, we left on no certain terms when we shook hands that they would be a part of this process, and we would make sure they were engaged.
And also hope there'll be strong student voice. You know, Mr. McClay had to leave early, but to be sure that we have those students in both of those schools, and also the schools that you're talking about that are within a 5-mile radius, to really be able to get the vision of students in terms of the kinds of things that they would like to have access to.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this has been a hugely important update tonight. I missed the meeting 2 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, I was home in bed with pneumonia, but I watched at home on TV. It's great fun to do that, by the way. First time I've ever done it.
Great fun to have pneumonia.
No, to watch a school committee meeting at home. I have a lot of respect for the folks that have the patience at home watching right now. But I did watch that presentation, and I did have some concerns. And so, Mr. Chair, you've given us a really important update tonight, and I thank you in particular for two things. One, and you almost mentioned this in passing, but it was important to me that, and so I want to make sure I heard you correctly, that you said there is no impact on any potential renovation or expansion of either the Devo or the McCormick. So they sit right next to each other, and then we have this field next to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the McCormick is currently a middle school. If we expand that and make it a 7 through 12, there's the possibility, you're saying, that could either be renovated or expanded, and it wouldn't impact us at all?
That's what the presentation was on April 11th.
Okay. So that's, but I still think that's important for folks to hear. And the separate pieces, and much more importantly, is what you shared with us tonight. I was really concerned with the process of us handing it over. You know, Dr. Uriarte, it's almost like you remind me of the movie, like Follow the Money. Right? Like, what's the money trail here? And the process, we unfortunately, and the superintendent, I think, had the proper legal term. We have the care and custody of the land. It's technically owned by the city, but we control it until we transfer it. We can never sell property, and if it's sold, it doesn't come back to us. So it's, you know, possession is 9/10 of the law, as they say, and we have it. And so to give that up on the promise that there was going to be a benefit for our students made me nervous, and I was really hoping we could put restrictions in that. But to hear what you described tonight, Mr. Chair, of that we don't need to do that, and that we can authorize them to start the process and involve the community, and still put some restrictions on up front, but still withhold the power that if we get an RFP back that we don't like, we can say, sorry, it's not what we thought about for this process. That saves the important vote for down the line. And so I am so much more comfortable with this now than I was before, particularly if, and with all due respect to the community around it, and, you know, Mr. Gonsalvo, you and I, we talked about, the superintendent talked about the Fish Family Foundation and the Consul General of Japan planting cherry trees at the Irving this past week. You recall, Mr. Gonsalvo, you and I stood in this very ball field last year at this time when Mrs. Fish was out there and the Consul General of Japan, and the gentleman who testified tonight from the Harbor Point community was there with us as well. And he made it very clear to us how much he liked that, the Harbor Point community liked that property and thought of it as kind of their field, and that their children get to play there as much as the Dever and McCormick do as well. So if we can, it's a long way of saying, if we can think of a way to really make it clear that we have 3 priorities here. If the school committee is going to say the Dever and McCormick, number 1. The children in the surrounding schools, you know, 1, 3, 5 mile radius, if they have a place that they can use for athletics or whatever it's going to be. And in a nod to that community, if we can add them in as well, I think we have a chance to say that this could ultimately be a win-win. And so, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure, in the resolution that we vote next week, is there a chance to state those priorities? Is that possible to build it in now that the school committee is willing to do an enter into an agreement with whatever the department is.
Department of Neighborhood Development.
Department of Neighborhood, so DND?
D&D.
D&D. To start an RFP, start a community process, but that the school committee wants the following priorities to be included, that it, be focused on the Deborah McCormick populations, the school populations within 1, 3, or 5 miles, whatever number, and the neighborhood communities, and that ask D&D to work in that regard. I don't know if that's possible, but.
Yeah, and I think it's an important question, and I hadn't gotten as far as thinking about specific wording of the resolution, but nevertheless, I think you framed the intent well, and my picture in my summary earlier was simply of creating a use for that property that benefits our school population. And so I think that's the broad statement. Yours is much more narrow, and I think we can work on something that is meaningful for giving our D&D the direction it needs to take this forward.
But it also keeps the control here, keeps the control within the schools, so that we have a chance to make the ultimate decision on, is this something of benefit to our school communities?
Absolutely.
And quite frankly, would alleviate a lot of the concerns of folks who have looked at this and said, like Dr. Uriarty said, what's going on here? Right, what? Is there something secret going on here that we're
Absolutely.
missing? So, my wife always says, assume good intent.
Right.
But we're talking land in the city of Boston here, so it's pretty important that we be transparent on this and make sure that we're making it very clear that this is something that potentially could positively impact our youth of the Deborah and the McCormick and the other schools around and the community youth. And if not, this doesn't go forward.
I thought you might even use the phrase trust but verify, but.
Well, that's another old chestnut that I use a lot, right? So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. If there are no further comments or questions, we can move on. I want to give everybody, yes,
Just want
Dean
to
Robinson.
make sure we can hear feedback from the schools.
Yes,
Students.
yes. And I think, this is a little bit different of a way in which this evening that we've addressed follow-up to a previous presentation that we received from the district. But given that if we are to take up a vote to approve next week an authorization for the district to work with the department on an RFP, that is going to have as we've heard this evening and in the last meeting as well, a robust community process. I think at some point it might be beneficial for us to come back and have a presentation from the district on just what that feedback was prior to the issuance of the RFP. We don't have a defined timeline. There wasn't a timeline in that previous presentation that we received from the district, and so I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to say, once you've taken your time to do the appropriate community process, that you come back at one of our future meetings and give us an update on what the feedback was.
That would be, I believe, prudent and in line with the members' sense of valuing for schools, for students, for parents especially. I was envisioning if the Hyde Park area were to receive notice that, the Ross Field was going to undertake, because you have the Hyde Park High School complex right there, and so I was already envisioning how would I feel as a resident in that area if I didn't know anything, and someone told me it was on, it was live on school committee, meet in a meeting, how that would make one feel about that large open space changing. So I heard them loud and clear. I'm glad that you clarified it, Mr. Chair, but I would want the school community to feel as though they had some knowledge and awareness, and they affirm this, as much information as possible as can be given in this process.
Yeah, I think without a doubt they'll have a first and foremost seat at the table.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Dean Robinson. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you again. Once again, I've asked, as I mentioned earlier, Ms. Sullivan to work with the district's legal advisor, Ms. Ocasio, on developing the resolution that we've discussed this evening, and we'll look forward to taking action on this item at our next meeting. We'll move on now to public comment on reports. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Lecanto. We have 2 speakers this evening, John Mudd, and he'll be followed by Peggy Wiesenberg.
Good evening again. Sorry to hit you twice in one evening, but I had a few comments that I wanted to share on the performance index that you have, the performance meter, I guess. And obviously on most of these measures, disaggregation is key, you know, and, you know, that means if you were looking at teacher diversity, it's not just the total, but how are we doing on Black or Latino teachers or Asian teachers? I mean, when the biggest gap we all know is in Latino teachers, you know, I think with 42% of Latino students and 11%, that's a lot. And one number, which is simple to follow, covers up that. Clearly on the student performance, a similar comment. We're interested in the achievement gap data, and Nicole clarified that it's not just the backup computer is going to show not just those bars, but it will actually enable you to calculate the achievement gap, you know, without me doing the arithmetic anymore, which is great. But that comes to the question about targets, and a couple of questions there. Are the targets that will be set here, are those going to be reviewed by the school committee and maybe have public comment on them, or not? Is this going to be something that is done just by the district? I mean, one thing that you know I've followed for years is the teacher diversity question. A 1% increase every year and maybe 6 points over the full time of this proposal is not as ambitious as I would like to see it. I know it's difficult, I don't mean to minimize, but I'm just saying that some kind of public comment might be helpful on these. And I would say, are there going to be achievement gap reduction targets? I said we can see, you know, the achievement gap on the data, but will there be targets? Since this is a priority, will there be targets, you know, for achievement gaps? And a final sort of, well, Jerry Robinson can correct me, but my memory is that the Opportunity Achievement Gap Task Force asked if there could be some investigation about the disaggregation of terms like Black and Latino. And I wondered whether there had been any investigation of that. Clearly, you know, African Americans, West Indians, Haitians, and Africans, or, you know, El Salvadorans, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, you know, have different cultural histories, and whether we can begin to push ahead on that. It's not simple. Probably nobody's done it, but Boston's an innovator, so I would like to see it pushed. And my final plea in taking this time is that, again, we not just get lost in the data when you get a presentation about how we're doing here. What is the response? What are the lessons from the data, and what is the plans to deal with it? Thank you for indulging me again.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Peggy Wiesenberg.
Thank you. I'm going to speak on the Columbia Point issue. I find it very, very troubling that as promising as a public-private partnership might be in theory, I find it troubling for you to move forward without involving the schools. And the McCormick has no parent council right now. I called the family engagement, or I emailed with them, and they said there's no school parent council there. There is one at the Dever, but the people at the schools have no idea about this. The public has no idea, superintendent and committee, what those schools are going to be. You said tonight, I think Mr. O'Neill confirmed that these might be reconfigured, that people don't know if the middle school will be moved to Excel or someplace else. There's no transparency. There's no Build Boston. There's no plan put out. But at least if you're talking about these two schools, can't you tell us what the plan is for these two schools? Sure, there's, 10 pages of assessment by the SMMA group saying the site's expandable. But what are going to be in these buildings? Also, it seems a little odd just picking this site. With all due respect to the Harbor Point Task Force and community, this is a pretty remote area of the city. So if you're talking about building or having a public-private partnership to build a community facility, why isn't it more in the corridor where Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, where a lot of our students and the growth is going to be? So I would just ask that you postpone this and give us an assessment. Do we have properties across the city that are underutilized? What makes something underutilized? Nobody's explained that at any of these meetings. And also, as a lawyer, I have to say, of course, you have a right to get a legal opinion and claim attorney-client privilege. But if you're relying on this as a public body to move forward with a decision that could set precedent for the district, you should make that public. And you have the authority to do that, as you know.
Thank you, Ms. Weisenberg.
Mr. Locondo, that concludes our speakers for this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. New business? Does anyone have the score of the game?
May I just make one point? Superintendent, as much as we hate to lose good people on your team to other areas, I also think it's a mark of respect for the folks that you've recruited when they move up into positions of leadership in other districts. And I believe there was an announcement last night that I saw that one of your team members has been hired as a superintendent of another district, so.
Yep, I can share that.
Since it was public on Twitter.
Yes, it was public on Twitter. The board of Medford did vote unanimously to select Maurice Edouard Vincent. They're in the middle of their contract negotiations, so nothing finalized yet. But yes, if it's on Twitter, I guess it's fact.
But I'm torn when I hear it.
Awesome.
We hate losing good people to other districts, and yet I do view it as a measure of respect. There are a number of superintendents right around us now, or Brookline and Waltham and Somerville and now Medford, that were senior people in our district, and we hated to lose each of them. But that's a pretty good thing too, that people view our folks as strong and solid, and that you've recruited good folks over the years. So
It's also my job to inspire other people to want to do this job.
it's a tough job, and if folks want to step up and be superintendent, I give them credit.
Teachers inspire young people to want to be teachers.
Right.
That's our job.
Yes, and I think it's but I also think that's why it's so critical that we have a pipeline, and I love how you have been promoting teachers to be school leaders and school leaders to be deputy superintendents. Look at Ms. Driscoll as I say this, and so on and so forth, that you've been bringing in great people from around the area, but also building a pipeline within our district, which is critical. And I view it as a sign of respect that it's an open market, and if they want to come try to get some of our people to be positions of leaders, that's great. They can be a superintendent in other areas for a little while and then come back and be in senior roles with us, and that's great. So I just wanted to make sure that was mentioned and congratulate.
Yes, thank you very much for mentioning it. I was going to hold off until everything got signed. Sometimes things flip, as we've learned from other cities.
Nothing solid until the
She has
contract's
she has
signed.
another place that she's also
yes, she was a finalist in another district as well. So, cool.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there any other new business?
Mr. Chair, I believe when one of us becomes a Secretary of Education, we'll be able to thank you or Mr. O'Neill for setting the bar and inspiring some of us to next things. So, thank you, Mr. O'Neill, for your comments.
We'll take any credit we can get, put it that way. Well, that concludes our business for this evening. Our next school committee meeting will be on Wednesday, May 23rd at 6 p.m. If there's nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Sounds like unanimous consent. Good night.